Preface. This is the third volume of Letters. It represents the fourth book of Ficino's Epistolae, covering mainly the period from 1st of March to the 1st of August 1477. A number of letters, however, fall outside this period, notably the letters in praise of philosophy, letters 13, and of medicine, letter 14, which were written as speeches, presumably to the academic audiences in Ficino's youth. The last two letters in the volume were written in 1478 and 1479 to Platonists in Hungary. They were originally included in the 5th and 6th books respectively, but were transferred when books 3 and 4, volumes 2 and 3 of the present translation, were presented to King Matthias of Hungary. The period covered in this volume of letters is that leading up to the Pazzi conspiracy against the rule of the Medici. In the conspiracy, which was followed by a war against Florence waged by a powerful alliance of states, led by Pope Sixtus IV, Lorenzo de' Medici's brother Giuliano was murdered in Florence Cathedral, and Lorenzo himself was wounded. Two of Ficino's correspondents, Francesco Salviati and Jacopo Braccolini, were executed for complicity. Although Ficino would not have known of the plan to murder the Medici, a letter in his own volume, letter 36 to Braccolini, seems to indicate that he did know of the conspirators' hostile intentions, and a further one to Pace, letter 8, written less than a fortnight before the attempt, shows that he understood that war would be the inevitable consequence of their disaffection. In Ficino's letters to Salviati and Braccolini, it is clear that he is persistently and strongly discouraging them from taking any rash action. During the period covered by the letters in this volume, Ficino was working on a revision of his translations of Plato's dialogues and his commentaries on them. The whole of Book 4, Volume 3, concentrates, even more than the first two volumes, on the philosophy of Plato. Some of the letters consist largely of passages taken from the dialogues. The largest single letter, about a quarter of the volume, is a life of Plato, based mainly on the This life also forms the introduction to Ficino's translation of the dialogues of Plato. It furnishes some interesting parallels with Ficino's own life, as described in the biography by Giovanni Corsi, which is included. Partly for this reason, at the end of this volume, both philosophers led celibate and ascetic lives. Both had close relations with heads of state, whom, to some extent, they influenced by their philosophy. Ficino regarded the life and character of Plato as his model. He wrote in the proem to Book 2 of De Vita Libri Tres, "Although the spirit of our Plato lives, and will live as long as the world itself shall live, yet my spirit always impels me, after worshipping the divine, to obscure the life of Plato above all else." Ficino consciously based his academy on that of Plato, as it is described by the ancient Platonic writers, and devoted his whole life to making the philosophy of Plato a living philosophy to his contemporaries. A central theme of this volume is the liberation of man through philosophy. Both the passages which he quotes in full from the dialogues, the analogy of the cave, letter 26, and the many-headed beast, 27, relate to just this. Above all, the letter on the nature and education of a philosopher, letter 18, delineates the precise steps by which a man is freed from desire, so that he may attain knowledge of truth. No one can be envied who can see how many times we are driven both inwardly and outwardly by the Furies. Marsilio Ficino of Florence to Lorenzo Franceschi, the son of Domenico. Pythagoras charged his disciples not to eat brain or heart. That is, they should not consume the brain with empty thoughts, nor burn out the heart with excessive cares. If all things happen by chance, they labor in vain to presume to control completely, but to manage by fixed principles of reasoning, affairs in which countless ways happened beyond reason. If all things come from fate, those who strive to avoid what is unavoidable, necessity fall more heavily into fate, for to it they are adding their own labor. Lastly, whether our affairs are said to come from chance or fate, divine providence, by reason, puts unreasonable chance in order, and gently tempers stern fate in accordance with the good. Thus, all things become ordered and good to those who willingly unite with the divine will. For these men alone, what is within the mind accords with external events, but for everyone else, at every point they are at variance. These men alone make what is necessary voluntary and appeals evil good. Just as the pure mind rejoices in universal good, so the impure mind is afflicted with every evil. Just as the greatest light plunders in and appropriates to itself all other lights, so the greatest evil on earth, an evil man, draws from all quarters every evil to himself. He brings much more onto himself than he would receive from elsewhere. Just as we are insatiable for what is good, so, in some strange way, are we almost insatiable for evil. Present evil we do not as much experience as strengthen. Past evils we seek again. Future evils we seize in advance. Those do not in the future we invent. I did not need to mention the perversity of mind from which we suffer adversities. Do we not misuse prosperity that happiness itself becomes our greatest unhappiness? External success for us is no more than the point of departure from reason and law, and what is soundless of body, for us both in unsoundness of mind. Also, beauty and bodily strength often lead to the deformity and weakness of soul. Oh, how deformed we are! How often our deformed state do we set upon that which God makes beautiful! Alas! How ungrateful are to God, the giver of all good things! How frequently we condemn his works with his governance! The more our stores abound his good fruits, the more do we produce thorns and weeds within ourselves and sow them at home and abroad. And although we produce and sow bad things, we are none the less astonished if we reap the worst, and we blame the stars or God, and not our own husbandry. Therefore, no one can be envied. Who can see how many times we are all driven inwardly and outwardly by the Furies? In your homeland it would be difficult for you to perceive who is happier than anyone else. Outside it, it would be harder still to see who is the most miserable. In both cases, the reason is almost the same. In your own country, each rejoices with the greatest joy. Here, each of us is afflicted with the greatest pain. Unless we are completely blind, we should see clearly from this that since our sowing does so badly on earth, it is not earthly but heavenly, and, if rightly cultivated, will bear heavenly fruit. When you have satisfied reason and counsel, consider yourself to have satisfied all. Marsilio Ficino to his fellow philosopher. As I hear, You are much disturbed because those things which you understand yourself to have performed with sure reason are condemned by many. Do you make of yourself such a great thing, a friend? Do you make of yourself so great a thing, friend, that you would wish those who do not spare God to spare a man? What can be more beautifully or perfectly executed than those things which come from God, who is the highest reason? Yet, in these divine works he is everywhere disparaged. We bristle at spirits, blame the stars, condemn the times, and also find fault with the forms and properties of plants and animals. We carpet men, assiduously bewail our lot. What we have freely received from God displeases us. What we in our ingratitude have done pleases us so much that we displease God. As often you are charmed by your new works as by your own newborn child. Pray make effort to yield to reason and submit to counsel. When you have satisfied searching reason in the proven counsel of the wise, consider yourself to have satisfied all men. For thus you have satisfied truth itself, which is greater than all. But if you have thought, spoken, and done in accord with such reason is condemned in other places, bear in mind that a sign of good food is that it displeases bad taste, but proof of bad food is that it pleases bad taste. Farewell, and once your will has submitted to true reason, be not disturbed if what follows is beyond your will. Letter 3. He who is not wise regarding himself wastes his wisdom. Marsilio Ficino to the moral philosopher without morals. Greetings. How absurd is a tailor whose clothes are all torn? How useless is a doctor who's always sick? How distressing a musician whose lyre is untuned to his voice? Just as base is a moral philosopher without morals, who speaks well but acts badly, speaks in vain, whether he is preaching good to men who will not believe him, or beseeching gifts from the gods who will not grant them. Letter 5. We ought to consider not what someone gives, but the spirit in which he gives. Marsilio Ficino and Giovanni Cavalcanti to Giorgio Antonio Vespucci, an excellent and most learned citizen. Greetings. I am giving you our book on true piety, not that I may instruct in piety a man who is already distinguished by his piety, but because I consider that by his one offering, more than by all my discourses, I shall satisfy piety itself. I deem I shall also satisfy my pious friends who, since he always glows with pious love, measures the love itself in everything rather than its result. For he knows that in reality there is nothing great in the outward circumstances. Conversely, there is nothing in great love that is not great. Furthermore, he knows that nothing great is ever even given by one who has never wished to give anything more than the thing that he has given. On the other hand, he knows that nothing small is given by one who considers that in comparison with his desire to give a greater, whatever he gives is small. Lastly, he knows that one should look not to the hand but to the heart of the giver, and as much as one wishes to bestow, so much the other is said to owe. For, even if not immediately in hand, nevertheless, the gift is received by us in the heart. and soon as we know what the friend wished to give. He who can give new things daily never gives anything excellent. He alone bestows the most excellent things, for whom there is nothing left to give a second time, since, at one and the same time, he bestowed himself, and with himself all that was his. So, to put the matter briefly, we either give nothing or everything. He who gives us something, but not his heart, is not offering a gift. He is either leaving something on deposit, or bribing us, or perhaps snaring us. But he instantly bestows everything who gives the self which possesses everything. Farewell. Letter 6. It is as shameful to love money as it is honorable to love man, and necessary and blessed to love God. Marsilio Ficino to Piero Guicciardini, distinguished both by his writing and his conduct. Greetings. There is as much shame in loving money as there is honor in loving a man worthy of love. No one doubts, provided he has ever loved anything at all. But the lover makes himself from himself and gives himself to the beloved. Money, on the contrary, can take the possession of a man who he loves, but can give nothing back. Hence, such a lover possesses neither money nor himself. However, he who loves a man, who returns his love, in so far as in loving he gives himself to the other, so far does he receive himself while being loved in return. Indeed, to speak more precisely, he receives double measure. For this reason, he who has given one soul receives two. Further, just as it is clearly honorable and profitable to care for a man worthy of friendship, so it is necessary and blessed to love God, the first source of love and beauty, without whose fire no one is able to love anything, without whose splendor nothing can be loved. Farewell, fortunate one, and condemn me to the illustrious citizen, your father, Jacopo. 1st of March, 1476. Florence. Letter 7. As each is in himself, so to each are those things which he receives. Marsilio Ficino to Giovanni Aurelio of Rimini, and Giovanni Pietro Quartucci of Padua, his fellow philosophers. Greetings. To fall into those things which are commonly called evil, unless you deserve evil. For one does not suffer evil unless one is evil. It is no good to have those things which are called good unless you deserve good. For one does not enjoy good things unless one is good. The internal does not depend on the external. Rather does the external depend on the internal. As each is in himself, so to each that which he receives. It is not chance we are allowed to bewail so much choice. We are continually pursuing evil thoughts. Evil assail us every day, every quarter. Daily we chase after evils. Deservedly evils chase us. We exercise utmost cruelty. In turn, cruelty exercises us. We flee from mercy, and mercy flees from us. The more willfully we flee from human justice, the more does divine justice overtake us. Whether we will or no, in the very crime is the punishment of the crime. The reward of good is in the good. We do good only tomorrow, so only tomorrow receive the good. Today we do evil, and we suffer evil today. We are all in discord with ourselves. In turn, all things are discordant to us. If you rightly temper the movements of the mind, as the Persian Magi teach, you will then temper all things to yourself, the bodily humors, seasons of the year, planets, plants, all living beings in heaven. Indeed, without any doubt, you will temper them if you set the mind in order with as much care as architects order stones, painters color and line, musicians voices, and poets words. And, I may say in conclusion, nothing in you will appear out of order if you set the brain in order, your hair which covers the brain. Farewell, and, lest you attend to other things in vain, first of all attend to yourself. Letter 8. By discord are all worldly things held together in place. By discord are all things held in opposition both to themselves and to others. Marsilio Ficino desires peace for his pace, but fears war. You wrote to me recently, my pace, as is your custom, a very kind and elegant letter. But I wrote nothing to you because I considered that nowhere was there the peace, since I regarded all things to be inwardly filled with discord. But now I have just found my pace, where I have long been finding my peace. Jove, as they understand heavenly things declare, is the author of human peace. Rinaldo Orsini, child of love, nourishes both my pace and my peace. As you request, I will earnestly commend you to the child of Phoebus. But I beseech you, in your turn, commend me to the child of Jove. However, before bringing this latter to a close, unless perhaps you think it absurd, after peace, I want to philosophize with you a little bit about war. The evil spirits are in opposition to the blessed angels, the signs of the zodiac to each other, planets to planets, elements to elements, plants to plants, animals to animals. Furthermore, movement is set against stillness, deprivation against possession, light against darkness, the white and clear against black, sound against silence, high notes and low notes, the fragrance against the fetid, the salty against the insipid, and, as the Aristotelians believe, sharp and bitter against sweet, hot against cold, dry against wet, light against heavy, dense against fine, rough against smooth, and finally hard against soft. Fortune and fate are opposed to the bodily humors to one another, limbs to limbs, the body itself to the soul, the senses to reason, one emotion to another. Vice is set against virtue, and the vices against each other. Opinion is opposed to opinion, and finally, desire to desire. Of all things, the virtues alone, if they are found anywhere, so accord that man who pursues but one of them acquires them all. Other things, however, nowhere more accord than in their very discord. Who should therefore wonder that mankind is driven by its own unceasing discord? By discord, all things are held together in place. By discord, all things are held in opposition, both to themselves and to others. All things sound in consonance outwardly, only where inwardly nothing is in dissonance. Furthermore, nothing is inwardly dissonant, where either pure truth holds sway, or the splendor of pure truth shines forth in abundance, or the heat of that same splendor glows. First is God, second is the contemplation of God, third is the love and adoration of God. These things are able to give us that peace, my pace, which the world, being everywhere full of discord, cannot give, but, lest perhaps by reasoning any more about war, I should seem by this lengthy discourse to have declared war on your eyes and ears, I will say farewell. 13th of April, 1478. Letter 9. In order to change your lot for the better, change the form of your soul for the better. Marsilio Ficino greets mankind. Today, while I was inquiring within myself for the main reason why men constantly lead so laborious on a life on earth, there came to my mind a game in which people walk along the palms of their hands and on the crown of their head, with their legs in the air. Furthermore, they endeavor with one eye to survey everything on earth, and with the other everything in the heavens. Then, whatever presents itself on the ground they attempt to grasp with nostrils, lips, and fingers. Conversely, whatever hangs above them they attempt to handle and gather with their feet, and whatever they touch they undertake to carry. Disgraceful sight! Wretched monstrosity! These are not men, nor are they animals. They appear to me like those Stygian trees, among whose bitter leaves no fruit is to be found. Could anything be more monstrous be imagined? Anything more erroneous? Such, oh my friends, are we ourselves, almost all of us? Alas, wretched ones, almost all of us foolishly subject the head of the soul, that is, reason, to the senses, which are the soul's feet. Then with the mind, thus abase the level of the earth, we entrust that we may gain knowledge of things celestial as well as earthly. With the feet of the soul, the very lowest part, we try in vain to attain the very highest parts of nature. And while we struggle to make the very use of everything for ourselves, we carry around the burden of everything. Alas, what insane misery we labor under this time! What miserable insanity! Why do we bewail our lot or fortune? Why do we scheme audaciously to change fortune, to alter the course of fate? O soul, I pray you, change this game. Set your form all right, for thus shall you change fortune and alter the course of fate, and in an instant change for the better the form of the world itself for you. Letter 10. You may neither seek pure things in an impure way, nor, after you have found them, may you reveal them to impure men. Marsilio Ficino to the magnanimous Lorenzo de' Medici. Greetings. When, on the calends of November last, I composed one letter to Giovanni Cavalcanti on the rapture of Paul into the third heaven, and another to Phoebo Capella on the celestial and supercelestial light, I soon afterwards unhappily contracted that disease of the eyes to which doctors give the name cataract, and which, they affirm, betokens the onset of blindness. Although I have tried practically everything that is employed by doctors who are the heirs of Apollo, the shining father of doctors, Apollo himself, has not yet restored to me the light I once had. Alas,
How different is the nature of all things from that of light, my Lorenzo! Those who shun noises, smells, or tastes certainly escape such things, and those who particularly search for things of this kind are chiefly the ones who obtain them. But, alas, he who with all his strength seeks out light itself is apt to lose it, as much as he who seeks to flee far away from it. Paul of Tarsus, whilst fleeing with precipitate steps from the true sun, and pursuing the light of the very same sun with an impious arms, was deprived of all light, as it is recorded. Marsilio, on the other hand, whilst seeking to serve the sun and tend its light, has also nearly been deprived of it. Hence, yesterday, while the moon was in conjunction with the sun, a prayer to the divine Sun came to me. Perhaps the prayer is somewhat obscure, but in time it will become clearer. I hope, when my human sun has illumined this moon of mine and his, at least once with the rays of his eyes. Farewell. O sun, purging all men's hearts with your flames, do you wish so very much to be inaccessible to any mortal when, in fact, you are of all things most accessible to everyone? O sun, source of justice, sun, model of generosity, as urgently as you incite me to seek you out, so shine back on me, with just such brilliance, with just such healing. Have I, perhaps, dared to raise eyes that are too impure to the purest light? In this event, I confess, I have perhaps been too Phaeton. Nevertheless, Phoebus, I have been and am yours, so cleanse me with your heat, I pray, and cherish me, as you can cast your rays through everything. Phoebus, so you can heal everything with your health-giving flames, for, unlike Julian, the Platonist and former, but apostate Christian, I have not, being sunless, yet hymned the very sun himself, nor, in company with Claudian, have I impiously sung your dear sister, Proserpine, snatched, as the story goes, into the underworld, but rather, with Luke and Dionysius, I have honored your son, a certain Aesculapius, that doctor of souls from Tarsus, who was carried off into the world above. I have not, like Stesichorus and Homer, depicted the ill-fated seizure of Helen, that is, earthly appearance, but, as is the way of true Platonists, I have depicted the sublime upward soaring of the heavenly mind, nor have I, like indiscriminately made public mysteries, nor, like Pherecydes of Syros, disclosed to any earthly man the secrets of the heavenly beings, nor, like Hipparchus, the Pythagorean, have I ever made common to everyone the Delphic mysteries of sacred seer, which are proper to very few, nor, as was the way with Dionysius of Syracuse, have I attempted to lay before the impure senses of the crowd of Apollonian sense of Plato. I have not spoken openly of that about which men are not permitted to speak. I have not given what is holy to dogs or pigs, for it to be torn into shreds. On the other hand, it certainly seems to me that I have revealed to men, like Oedipus, as many secret things I have myself seen. However, to all the ignorant, I have given them completely veiled. What now, Phoebus? What do you most want me to do? You will send me, I suppose, to Ananias at Damascus, whither you once sent the blind Saul, where he immediately regained his lost sight. However, I wish that Ananias, for me, Phoebus, might be that child of yours, victorious Medici, once born in your morning rays. I have just set out for Damascus, my guide for the journey being that very son of the Platonic son. To him who is indeed your child, but my Ananias, I have made a little offering in pledge of a greater sacrifice, the remainder of which I will shortly give him. Therefore, Phoebus, now give back to me, if it is your will, give back to me, I beseech you, the light I have long desired. April 14th, 1477.
11. A good action should be performed because it is pleasing. It ought to please so that it may please God. Marsilio Ficino. To Laterio Neroni, greetings. Great as was my satisfaction with all I said and wrote at the beginning of my studies, Laterio, thereafter my daily dissatisfaction with all my work has been nearly as great. Yet every day I am impelled, I know not by what fate or spirit, to write something, even against my will. So in order to offend Marsilio and others as little as possible, it is always foremost in my mind, when writing, to be as brief as I can. But by being too brief in my eagerness to avoid a tedious prolixity, I sometimes in a way do not make myself clear. Certainly, I often perplex others, but this usually happens, and rightly, to those who have not learned to maintain measure in things. Now look, how ridiculous it will seem, O friend, how absurd, that I should be compelled to explain in an intimate letter to my friend, who sometimes appears to be like a second Mercury in his power of comprehension. But I think I am really under no such compulsion, for while you seek from us clearer and simpler instruction, you give us abundant instruction. You have failed to disguise your subtlety, O pseudo-ignoramus, for I have seen what makes you ask for a clearer explanation of my letter. It is a burning desire for further discourse with me, not zeal for plainer instruction. Thus, cunning fellow, you now demand not elucidation but prolixity. Nonetheless, to satisfy you with a longer discourse, and to use plainer words for anyone else who perhaps may really inquire in explanation, the essence of my previous letter is this. With every power I have always endeavored to set in motion whatever the counsel of the wise and careful reasoning persuade me is good. I am not relating this good to some external benefit, which would be in the future, short-lived and dependent on the choice of men or fortune, but first and foremost to that true joy which is expressed in the very action of the good. Even if this good and this joy can be described as temporal, since the good is not followed, nor the joy experienced continuously in the same way, yet they lie deep within ourselves and in our will. Indeed, good is of this kind, and gives satisfaction both in the present and in the entity. I say this not because I now enjoy eternity directly, but for no reason than that I understand that this good accords me with the form of the good, that is, with the eternal knowledge and the art of the Almighty God. Therefore, just as I have related that good back to you, your inner joy, so I relate joy back to the form of the good, so that clearly by this reasoning the good may please me, and thence I myself may best please God, the good of all good,
without whom nothing can please me. You say, I do not possess happiness at present, but I hope for it in the future. Desire happiness, Lothario, and you will be happy with present, that is, eternal happiness rather than future happiness. For if any future happiness is in you, it is happiness for this reason, that it contained within that happiness which neither past nor future touches. Farewell. 15th of April, 1477. Letter 12. There is nothing more wonderful nor more lovely than learning united with virtue. Marsilio Ficino of Florence to Marco Aurelio, the distinguished orator. Greetings. When singular learning, Marco Aurelio, is united with surpassing virtue, from this conjunction, as if of the sun and Jupiter, such splendor bursts forth from the learning, and such fire from the virtue, that, by these rays and flames which spread from the rising to the setting sun, the minds of even the most distant peoples are aroused and kindled, gently enticed and violently seized. Thus, on this principle, Marco Aurelio used to entice his youthful Marsilio Ficino, and now seizes him at a ripe age. Now you see all this plunder hastening towards you, Marco, as your own, your Marsilio, equally in youth as well as in your years. Accordingly, he presents you with 6 short speeches, the first 2 of which, in praise of philosophy and in praise of medicine, date from his tender age. The 4th subsequent ones, concerning the principal practices of the human race, were born this spring. Thus, at long last, they will have been born fruitfully if, in your presence, they are continuously nurtured. Letter 13. A speech of Marsilio Ficino in praise of philosophy. Most noble gentlemen, at this moment my mind is pulled in contrary directions, as has often happened to those about to give an address on serious subjects. For the ancient custom of this venerable school, of the weighty authority of its founders, both of which rightly have the strongest possible influence upon me, urge me to speak today in praise of philosophy. But when I inwardly consider the power and nature of this subject, it appears to be so noble and excellent that I despair of its being understood by the human mind or expounded by the human tongue. The loftiness of the subject, the lowliness of my talent, and furthermore your awesome aspect, all now make me frightened to speak. So I falter between silence and speech. Yet, noble gentlemen, as far as I am able, I shall speak, having concluded that it is preferable for the subject of my speech not to appear to Marsilio than for Marsilio not to appear at the behest of his superiors. So you will forgive me if I fail utterly to express any outstanding praises of philosophy in accordance with her worth, and everything I will say will ascribe directly to the divine light, by whose illumination we perceive, by whose rays we understand, and by whose splendor we reveal everything. Most excellent gentlemen, the age-old view of theologians, confirmed by the reasonings of many philosophers, by which we have been well taught, and in which we have been well praised, and in which we have been raised, is this: the more perfect and worthy the honor each being appears in the natural order, the closer it approaches the perfection and its worth of the first cause of all, and the more nearly and clearly it represents the image of this cause within itself. The ancient theology of Egyptians and Arabs handed down this: God is the source of being, knowing and acting, whence Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Plato conveying that theology into Greece, declaring that the beginning of creation, the truth of this teaching, and the joy of life are from the self-same God. To this Plato bears witness in the Republic, Parmenides and Timaeus, as do Iamblichus and Proclus in their theologies. Following those ancient writers, Dionysius, an Areopagite, initially a Platonist and then a Christian, gave very extensive expression in his books on the same view, which was held much later by St. Hilary and St. Augustine, the principal Latin theologians. And so Augustine, in his books on the true religion and the city of God, calls God himself the maker of all things, the illuminator of truth, and bestower of happiness. And he confirms that this had been systematically treated, albeit in different words, by the Platonic philosophers many centuries previously. Furthermore, that in these three titles of God, first introduced by the ancient philosophers, the Christian Trinity is also comprehended in some way. And lastly, that the three aspects of philosophy discovered and decimated by Plato correspond to this Trinity of ours in all particulars. Let that branch of philosophic discourse which sets forth the causes and development of things correspond to God, their source. Let the next branch, in which the origin and method of setting things in order are treated, correspond to God, the illuminator of truth. Let the last part of philosophy, by whose precepts and on whose foundations we lead our lives and direct ourselves, the family and the state in the pursuit of happiness, also be compared in some measure to God, the bestower of happiness. From this, it can now be quite clear that philosophy, in every part of it, accords, as I have said, with the Godhead whole and perfect, and contains, so far as it is revealed to us, a handful and complete image of the power, wisdom, and goodness of Father, Son, and Spirit. Thus it is that of all the faculties of men, none appears closer or more similar to the Godhead than philosophy, and nothing so available to us save God himself is seen as more perfect or more excellent, for which reason Hermes, wisest of Egyptians, seems through godlike power to have explained this, when he declared that men became gods through the light of philosophy. Pythagoras also sounded the same note in the Golden Verses, and Plato, in his books on the Republic, appointed for philosophers at their death the sacred rites and mysteries that are according to the gods. Again, Empedocles of Agrigentum said that philosophy is a gift of the gods, which brings anyone it has touched to such a state that from a lofty mind he holds the contempt in everything which is set in motion. From the innermost point of the mind he is illuminated by divine rays, and always future blessedness with steadfast purpose. By what is nobler than the declaration made by Aristotle? Whereas the other arts and sciences, aghast at the size and difficulty of the matter, have moved long way in the search of truth, philosophy alone has never scourged laborious work. She has considered that she is not unworthy of the richest treasures, and that knowledge of these befits her, and is of the same birth. And since it is impossible to approach the heavenly regions through bodily strength, the soul, having acquired the power of mental discernment as guide by the gift of philosophy, transcends the nature of all things through contemplation. So said Aristotle. Finally, to be brief, since she is a gift from heaven, Philosophy drives earthly vices far away, firmly subdues fortune, marvelously softens fate, uses mortal gifts right mostly, and bestows immortal gifts according to desire. O treasure of all things most precious, in no way produced from the bowels of earth and Pluto, but descending from the topmost point of heaven and the head of Jove. Without possession of this treasure we cannot make right use of other treasures, nor possess anything fruitfully. O surest guide for human life, who, firstly, with the club of Hercules, puts the monsters of vice to headlong flight. Then, with the shield and spear of Pallas, she averts or overcomes the perils of fortune. Lastly, supporting men's souls with the shoulders of Atlas, she frees them from this earthly exile and restores them to their celestial homeland in the fullness of truth and happiness. May what Plato said be justified, that there was once a golden age when wisdom reigned, and that if ever philosophy reigns again, the golden age will return. But what are we doing, noble gentlemen? Why do we vainly seek to measure eternity in, so to speak, a moment of time? Not merely a day, but very many years would be insufficient, were we directly to understand, to adorn blessed philosophy with all her praises. So there remains nothing more to be said or done, but having left behind all this that set forth in motion, all that is lifeless, in which there is nothing to be found beyond shadows and phantoms, we should devote ourselves with whole mind and ardent spirit to the study of this divine gift. For lower than the human race, those who have no part in philosophy degenerate rapidly, as it were, into beasts. Those, however, who give moderate service to philosophy will without doubt go forth as men fit to teach the learned and rule the rulers. Yet he who, throughout an entire life, devotes himself wholly to her alone, once the body has been laid aside, as it were, will go straight and free to the upper regions and will ascend beyond human form, having become a god of life-given heaven. Letter 14. A speech of Marsilio Ficino in praise of medicine. The Pythagorean and Platonic philosophers who emanated from the fount of philosophy, Hermes Trismegistus, consider that nothing can be examined nor discovered in any way by the mind of men without that principle from which both the mind itself and those things must be learnt. Hence, they believe that the light for contemplating everything is that self-same whom all things originate. For just as the brilliance in the eyes discerns the brilliance of color within the sun's very light, creator of both color and eye, so the truthful mind comprehends the truth of anything within the highest truth, the begetter of every truth and of every mind. Thus, today, led by an ancient custom and the command of our fathers, we are going to speak in praise of medicine, which is said to be descended from Apollo, turning the sharp point of the mind away from the darkness towards the light. Let us thereby humbly invoke the rays of the true and supreme Apollo, so that, cleansed by his wholesome warmth, we may set forth the praise of this cleansing and bring it to perfection, either through his own worth, or at least through our own native powers. Most distinguished gentlemen, there are three principles by which philosophers have traditionally judged the perfection of any science: the end, the source, and the substance. Now, whether you follow the Hebrew and Arab theologians, or the Greek and Egyptian, The beginnings of medicine emanated from the Godhead itself. For the Hebrews and Arabs claim that Adam, the first father of the human race, acquired that wisdom by divine light. The others, however, maintain that Apollo that took wisdom upon himself from Jove, father of men and of gods, for the welfare of the human race. Apollo then revealed the same wisdom Aesculapius, from whom sprang those outstanding doctors, Podalarius and Machaon. The many generations afterwards, Hippocrates of Cos brought forth into the light things which, enveloped in obscure parables, had been handed down by the ancients. And all these whom I have so far mentioned are said to have been accorded to a place in the company of the gods by every pagan religion. What should I say of Pythagoras, Empedocles, Democritus, Diocles of Carystius, Aristratus, Praxagoras, Herophilus, Serapion, Apollonius, Gelasius, Heraclitus, Chemison, Sophisticanus, and Galen, and the most eminent and outstanding of Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle? We know for certain that all of these stood out as philosophers of deep penetration and published a large number of books in the art of healing. And what the Egyptians, most ancient of all races, whose priests without exception were outstanding physicians, as Homer, Euripides, and Plato attest. What of the Persian magi, or priests, Zoroaster, Hosthenes, Gobrias, Paxitim, Sinacaronis, Damageron, Hismosus, Ionis, Apollonius, Dardanus, through whom countless books on this art are said to have been brought to light, which safeguard our health by reference to movements of the stars, to words, herbs, precious stones, and vapors? And did not Mithridates too, the king of Pontus, to whom 22 tongues were intelligible, bestow long hours of work on studies of his discipline? Also Sabor, king of the Medes, the divine Avicenna, the many other Arabs, devoted themselves to this wisdom with fervent endeavor. So did Serapion and his son Ionis. Besides Ionis, Misyu, Abumeron, Avenzoar, Rhazes, Avaronis, Abugasis, Isaac, Haley, and many other wise Hebrews and outstanding Arabs. I need hardly mention the Latin writers, of whom Cornelius Celsus, Apuleius, Quintus Serenus, Calumalia, Pliny, and Lucasius, the first to comprehend these books in both prose and verse on the care of health. Those who have followed them are found to be almost without number, and are all so well known that you need no further elaboration whatsoever. Surely it is impossible to discover a source of any branch of learning more excellent than the birth of medicine, or one which is equal or even comparable to it, for it proceeds from a God, from heroes, kings, leaders, magi, philosophers, and indeed from the most ancient and wise of all men. Truly, the substance which is the subject to this art, and about which it turns, whose principles and properties it earnestly seeks, is man, upon whose Hermes Trismegistus placed such a high value that he declared man, after Almighty God, to be virtually the greatest of the gods. Also, according to the Stoics and the Peripatetics, everything which moved beneath the moon's sphere is created and set in motion for man's sake. Moreover, the Hebrews, Arabs, and Christian theologians saw that even the cosmos itself has been established for the sake of man. Who cannot see from this that man, with whom this skill of ours is concerned, is well nigh the most excellent of all things flowering from God. And hence that the science of caring for man must be judged the most perfect, nor would any physician say that his art centers upon man's body alone, since Phoebus, as may be read in the letters to Hippocrates, considered the care of the soul and of the body to come together in one. Thus, among the Egyptians and the Persians, the same men who were both priests and doctors, Plato writes in Charmides that those magi who were physicians of both soul and body, followers of Zamaxis and Zoroaster, believed that everything belonging to the body, good or bad, flows from the soul into the body itself, just as the nature of the eyes flows from the brain, and the nature of the brain from the whole body, just as it is possible to heal the eyes unless the brain is healed, just as it is impossible to heal the eyes unless the brain is healed, and to heal the brain without healing the whole body. So the whole body cannot be strong unless the soul is strong. The health of the soul is in fact cared for certain invocations to Apollo, that is, by philosophical principles. Furthermore, Socrates said it was common knowledge among the Thracians that it was customary for doctors, by administering some such treatment, to preserve a few men from death. So great is the dominion of the soul over the body, so great its power. The belief in this magic appears to accord with the Hebrew and Christian view that through the initially healthy soul of Adam's, the first father, all things were healthy, but that through its subsequent infirmity, all things became infirm. Cornelius Celsus, too, held that the entire and perfect art of medicine was understood when one had the power to look after a man's health by comprehending the movements of his mind and body. In these two, both natural and moral contemplation and their application are encompassed. Avicenna consequently judged the quality of the body to exert the greatest possible influence over the mind for better or worse, and also the dispositions, movements, and images of the mind itself exert the greatest influence over the health, good or bad, of the body. Has anyone not yet perceived the aim of the doctors? It is this, that by the care and dedication life and, moreover, a good life may be sustained. Could anything better or more desirable be added to this? What is closer to or more consonant with nature than to watch over and preserve what she herself has borne? Illustrious gentlemen, every one of you is aware that human prosperity lies not in the possession of things, but in their enjoyable use. Yet, all of the sound mind realize that without health, we cannot enjoy the use of anything. Thus, in a hymn to health, Orpheus sang, "Without thee, all things are useless to men." Medicine, therefore, since it either safeguards or restores health, is seen to preserve and re-establish the whole good at the same time. For this reason, the sacred writers of the Hebrews rightly instruct the honor of doctors. And Homer truly says, "One man of medicines is equal in worth to many other men." So, my friends, I strongly urge you all in no way to stint time, money, or labor, so that you may embrace with all your might this most wholesome art, the preserver of human life. Thus you will be able to watch over life with the prosperity of your support, then your family, and finally of everyone else, and the support of health. And ultimately you may prescribe for the good of all peoples, nay, even the mightiest kings, all of whom surrender themselves into your hands. Letter 15. In everything consult the man of experience. Marsilio Ficino to Lorenzo, the astronomer and poet. Greetings. When lately I sought a friend, one out of many, whom I might best consult on whether I had reason truly in my treatise on rapture of Paul into the third heaven. Lorenzo, the astronomic poet, and the poetic astronomer, came foremost into my thoughts. As an astronomer, his own Atlas has long raised him into heaven on his lofty shoulders. As a poet, his father, Phoebus himself, has sung with rounded tones on heavenly things. Therefore I shall consider I have portrayed a true image of the divine only when my Lorenzo has thoroughly approved. For with Atlas as his guide and Apollo to show him, he has seen the face of the divine. Letter 16. It is better to bear a bad state of health well than good health badly. Marsilio Ficino to his friends. Greetings. Why, friends, do you so frequently ask whether I am well? Rather ask whether I have last recovered. Though others seem born for good health, I, on the contrary, seem born just for this, to be the subject to continuous ill health. From the beginning, by a certain weakness of constitution, it has been my lot never to experience for a whole day full bodily health. But I weigh the damages of ill-willed nature against the most abundant gift of God, so that just as some men bear their good health badly, I for the most part bear bad health well. Therefore, just as some men are indebted to nature for a fortunate possession, so I am as greatly indebted to God for its use. When God himself is our strength, we cannot be entirely weak, for then strength of spirit is achieved by infirmity of the body. Indeed, it is good for me to cleave to God, since, as St. Augustine says, if I will not abide in him, I shall not be able to abide in myself. Therefore stand firm, O friends, stand firm in God, who is not moved, and you will stay firm. Find your peace in that which is not troubled, and in peace you will live. Letter 17. He has given everything once and for all, who has given his very self. Marsilio Ficino to Bernardo Bembo, the illustrious Venetian. Greetings. Scarcely I have given Jacopo Lafrandini a letter for you in which I wished to be assured that you had received all of my works, or rather yours, when your letter, filled with gravity, wit, and love, was given to me in return. But what shall I say about such marvelous gratitude? Some, when they have reached something freely given by another, afterwards barely give thanks. Our Bembo, however, when he has received what is by right his own, gives thanks, and indeed most copious thanks. I, my sweetest Bembo, have been unable to give you anything new for a long time now. I gave everything to you once and for all when I gave you Marsilio, and even if a possession of this kind is of little weight, for I am not the size to fulfill what you desire, yet it is no light thing that by your fine conduct you have seized and made captive all other men of letters, no less than myself. For you are the desire of all these men. You are the delight of our people. 26th of April, 1477. Letter 18. On the Platonic nature, instruction and function of a philosopher. Marsilio Ficino to Giovanni Francesco Ippoliti, the distinguished Count of Casaldo. A long time ago I wrote a rather lengthy letter to Bernardo Bembo of Venice, in praise of philosophy, and lately, something also on the same subject to the distinguished orator, Marco Aurelio. What remains, it seems, is for me to write something about the Platonic nature, instruction, and function of a philosopher, so that it may be more clearly revealed how precious treasure of philosophy may be easily rediscovered by us, and, once it is found, by what principle it may lawfully be possessed and measured out. Since philosophy is defined by all men as love of wisdom, is the very name introduced by Pythagoras, and wisdom is the contemplation of the divine, then certainly the purpose of philosophy is the knowledge of the divine. This our Plato testifies in the 7th book of the Republic, where he says that true philosophy is the ascent from the things which flow and rise and fall, and those which truly are and always remain the same. Therefore philosophy has many parts and ministering powers, as it seems, steps by which it has climbed from the very lowest level to the highest. These steps are determined partly by nature and partly by the diligence of men. For, as Plato teaches in the 6th book of the Republic, whoever is to become a philosopher should be so endowed by nature that, in the first place, he is willing and prepared to enter upon all manner of disciplines. Thereafter, that he is truthful by nature, completely opposed to all falsehood. In the third place, that having scorned all that is subject to corruption, he directs his mind to that remains always the same. He must be magnanimous and courageous, so that he neither fears death nor longs for empty glory. Over and above this, he should be born with something of an even temperament, and from nature he should receive already under control those parts of the mind which are usually carried away by the feelings. For whoever longs for the truth turns his mind to contemplation of the divine, and sets little value on the pleasures of the body. Beyond this, a philosopher should be of liberal mind, and in fact the prizing of worthless things is opposed to this, and completely counter the way of a man intending to contemplate the truth of things. Above this, his will chooses justice, since he is utterly devoted to truth, moderation, and liberty. Liberality. But most of all, it seems that he needs sharp insight, memory, and magnanimity. What is more, these three gifts of nature, namely sharp insight, memory, and magnanimity, when discipline and a proper education have been added, produce a man perfect in virtue. But if they are neglected, they are said by Plato to be the cause of the greatest crimes. Therefore this nature must be given man's greatest care, so that he who is thus shaped by nature from his childhood learns letters, the elements of all knowledge. And indeed, the unordered mind of this person must be put in order by the use of the lyre. The body must be exercised by gymnastic games, so that, coming into a good condition itself, it offers service to the studies of philosophy. Meanwhile, the precepts of the best laws should be heard by him and fixed in his mind. Thus, the mind of the young man should be formed by honest encouragement, so that it is rendered temperate and peaceful. This moral education men in fact call ethics. In truth, when the mind is freed from the disturbance of the desired by these means of which I have just spoken, it will already have begun to be loosened from the body. Then it must be given knowledge of mathematics, which concerns number, plane figures, and whole forms and their manifold movements. Indeed, since numbers and figures and the principles of movements belong to the faculty of thought rather than the outer senses, the mind, by the study of these, is separated not only from the appetites of the body, but from its senses also, and it applies itself to inner reflection. This is indeed to meditate on death, which, Plato writes in Phaedo, is the duty of the practicing philosophy. Through this we are restored to the likeness of God, as is taught in Phaedrus
and Theaetetus. However, according to the Platonists, in the thorough understanding of these things there is this order. Geometry follows arithmetic. Stereometry, geometry. Astronomy follows this. And lastly, music follows astronomy. For numbers are before figures, plain figures are before whole forms, but bodies are whole before they are set in motion. The order and ratios of sounds follow movement. Therefore, let arithmetic, which concerns number, come first. Let geometry, which deals with plane figures, follow. Let stereometry, which considers whole bodies, follow after this. Let the fourth be held by astronomy, which raises the sight of the movements of the whole bodies, that is, the movements of the spheres. Let music, which investigates the order of sounds born out of motion, be last. When these have been thoroughly understood, Plato gives dialectic, that is, knowledge of how truth is made manifest. But he means by dialectic not only that logic which teaches the first and the most detailed rules of reasoning, but also the profound skill of the mind free to comprehend the true and pure substance of each thing, first by physical, then by metaphysical principles. Thus, the reason for anything can be made known, and finally the light of the mind may be perceived beyond the nature of senses and bodies, and the incorporeal forms of things, which we call ideas, may be understood. By means of these, the same one source of all species, the origin and light of minds and souls, the beginning and end of all, which Plato calls the good itself, may be inwardly perceived. The contemplation of this is wisdom, love of which is the most correctly defined as philosophy. In truth, once the mind of a man practicing philosophy has contemplated the good itself, and thence judges what things in human affairs are good, what bad, what dishonorable or honorable, harmful or useful, he organizes human affairs as a model of the good itself. He leads them away from evil, directs them towards good, and by this wise governance he manages personal, family, and public affairs, and he teaches the laws and principles of good management. From this, laws have their beginning. For this reason, in Timaeus, Plato asserts that philosophy is a gift of God, and nothing more excellent has ever been granted us by God than this. For the good itself, which is God, could bestow nothing better on a man than a complete likeness of its own divinity, as near as possible. Indeed, who will doubt that God is truth unconfirmed by the body and providing for all? But the philosopher, by moral instruction and that early education of which we have already spoken, frees the mind from desire in the sense of the body, attains truth by dialectic, and makes provision for men, teaching them citizenship. Thus it comes about that philosophy is a gift, a likeness, and a most happy imitation of God. If anyone is endowed with philosophy, then out of his likeness to God, he will be the same in earth as he who is God in heaven. For a philosopher is the intermediary between God and men. To God he is man, to men God. Through his truthfulness he is a friend of God. Through his freedom he is a possessor of himself. Through his knowledge of citizenship he is a leader of all other men. Indeed, it is said that the golden age once existed because of such a ruler, and Plato prophesies that it will return only when power and wisdom come together in the same mind. According to Plato, the minds of those practicing philosophy, having recovered their wings through wisdom and justice, as soon as they have left the body, fly back to the heavenly kingdom. In heaven they perform the same duties on earth. United with God in truth, they rejoice. United with each other in freedom, they give thanks. They watch over men dutifully, and as interpreters of God and as of prophets, what they have set in motion here they complete there. They turn the minds of men towards God. They interpret the secret mysteries of God to human minds. On this account the ancient theologians just honored the minds of those practicing philosophy as soon as they were released from the body, just as they honored the 30,000 divinities of Hesiod as demigods, heroes, and blessed spirits. Thus, philosophy, to express it in a few words, is the ascent of the mind from the lower regions to the highest, and from darkness to the light. Its origin is an impulse of the divine mind. Its middle steps are the faculties and the disciplines which we have already described, and its end is the possession of the highest good. Finally, its fruit is the right government of men. I have communicated these matters to our Francesco Berlinghieri as a philosopher friend, but for the same reason you will also communicate them to our friend Giuliano Bergo.
19. On the life of Plato. Marsilio Ficino to his own Francesco Bandini. Greetings. In the last few days I tried to paint the ideal form of a philosopher in Platonic colors. However, if I had brought Plato himself into our midst, I would assuredly not have pointed to some picture of that ideal form of a true philosopher, but to the ideal form itself. Therefore, let us look closely at our Plato, so that we may see equally philosopher, philosophy, and the ideal form itself at one and the same time. Genealogy and birth of Plato. Plato of Athens, the son of Ariston and Perictione, or Petone, traced his descent on both sides from Neptune. For Solon was descended from Nereus and Neptune. The brother of Solon, Dropides, had a son, Critias the elder, from whom Callistraeus is descended. He had two sons, Critias the younger, who was one of the 30 rulers of Athens, and Glaucon, who was the father of Charmides, and Perictione. Perictione married Ariston and gave birth to Plato. Adimantus, Glaucon, and a girl, Petone, who married Eurymedon and gave birth to Spesipius. Plato's father, Ariston, in turn was descended from Codrus, the son of Melanthus, who again traced their descent back to Neptune, as does Solon. It is said to have been well known in Athens that Ariston tried to approach Perictione, as she was very beautiful, but his attempts were in vain. Then he saw Apollo in a dream, and was commanded by him to keep her free from conjugal intercourse until she had given birth. Both Lauretus and Polycrates write of this. Plato was born either in Athens or in Aegina 756 years after the capture of Troy, 333 years after the founding of Rome, and 423 years before the coming of Christ. In my book, On Love, I describe the position of planets at Plato's birth, as I heard of them in my youth. But now I shall draw your attention to the position as described by Julius Firmicus, the astronomer, whose opinion on this matter I consider to be more correct. And it is as follows. Mars, Mercury, and Venus are in Aquarius, which is the ascendant. In the second house, the sun is in Pisces. In the fifth, the moon is in Gemini. In the seventh, Jupiter is in Leo. and in the ninth, Saturn is in Libra. Julius Firmicus claims that such a nativity signifies a man who has the power of wonderful eloquence and approaches all the secrets of the Godhead with divine genius. The upbringing, natural qualities, learning, and even-mindedness of Plato. It is revealed that while he was in the cradle, some bees cast honey onto his infant lips as a presage to the future eloquence. They say that Socrates in a dream saw on his knee a fledgling cygnet. All at once it grew its feathers and, spreading its wings, flew into the sky, sending forth the sweetest songs. The next day Plato was presented by his father to Socrates, who said, "This is the swan I saw?" In Plato's youth his poetry came to flower. It composed elegies and 2 tragedies, which he himself consigned to the flames as soon as he applied his mind to philosophy. His first learning was imparted to him by the teacher Dionysius. Then, at the age of 20, he received instruction from Socrates. After the death of Socrates, he attached himself to Cratylus, a disciple of Heraclitus, and to Hermogenes, an upholder of the philosophy of Parmenides. When he was 28, he and other disciples of Socrates betook themselves to Euclides at Megara. From here he set out for Cyrene to hear Theodorus the mathematician. Next he went to Italy to the Pythagoreans. From then he withdrew the prophets and priests into Egypt. He had intended to go on to the Magi and to the Indians because of the wars in Asia. He had given up his plan. Finally, he returned to Athens and lived at the Academia. It is said, and St. Basil and St. Jerome confirm this, that he chose this unhealthy place in Attica so that the over-fine condition of his body, like the excessive growth of a vine, might be cut back, for he was very strong and handsome, and because of this his broad shoulders and ample forehead, the outstanding condition of his whole body, and also his richness of speech, he was called Plato, although he had previously been named Aristocles. He was without flaw, except perhaps he had rather a soft voice and some kind of lump just below the neck, which marred him a little. Through living at Academia he suffered a quartan fever for 18 months, but with temperance and good care he gained greater strength after his fever than he had had before. The 3 military expeditions and sea voyages of Plato. The first voyage. He went on military service 3 times, first to Tangra, secondly to Corinth, and thirdly to Delium, where he also gained prize for valor. He sailed to Sicily 3 times, the first time to see the island, the marvels of Mount Etna, and the craters. He was then in his 14th year, and it was at this time too that Dionysius, the son of Hermocrates, urged Plato to come and talk with him. Here Plato was discoursing on absolute rule, saying it was not the best because absolute rule would not only profit itself alone, unless it were also distinguished by virtue. The story goes that the tyrant, offended and angry, said, "Yours are the words of idle old men," to which Plato rejoined, "And yours smack of tyranny." At those words the enraged tyrant at first actually wanted to kill him, but on the entreaty of Dion and Aristomenes he did not carry this out. However, he did hand him over to Polus of Sparta, who at that time had come to Dionysius as an ambassador, so that Plato might be sold as a slave. Polus took him to Aegina and sold him, whereupon Charmandrus too arranged him on the capital charge, for, indeed, according to law passed there, it was a capital offense for any Athenian to go to that island. On the other hand, when someone put forward the argument that Plato, thanks to his training, had risen to become a philosopher, and that law spoke of men and not philosophers who were above men, they acquitted and dismissed him, and they decreed that he should not be killed but sold. Anicetus the Cyrenian happened to be there, and he redeemed him for 20 minae, and sent him back to his friends in Athens. But Polus was defeated by Chabrias, and a little later he was drowned in Helios. Being told by a spirit, so the story goes, that he was suffering these things on account of the philosopher. Nor did Dionysius rest. Indeed, when he learned what had befallen Polus, he wrote begging Plato not to put a curse on him. Plato wrote back to him that the study of philosophy left him little leisure for thinking about Dionysius. When some other people despairingly remarked that he had been forsaken by Dionysius, Plato replied, "On the contrary, Dionysius has been abandoned by Plato." The second voyage. On the second occasion we went to Dionysius the Younger, having been invited by him and by Dion to expound philosophy. He was also led by the hope that through his counsels he would bring it about that there a republic or kingdom would evolve from a tyranny, and that he would see something he had been ardently desiring for a long time, namely, a most philosophical form of government, in which either the philosophers govern or rulers study philosophy. For he believed that in no other way could states avoid misery. He wanted all this to be brought about, not by force or deceit, but, once Dionysius had been won over, by philosophical reasoning. But for about 4 months after Plato's arrival, Dionysius was persuaded, by false accusations of plotting against the tyranny, to banish Dion. Nevertheless, he gladly continued to show favor to Plato, but Plato returned to his own country. The third voyage. On the third occasion, Plato came intending to reconcile Dion with Dionysius. After he had been implored again and again by both of them, he was asked by Archidas also. On that occasion Dionysius sent a well-provisioned trireme, Archidemus, the Pythagorean orator, and many noblemen to meet Plato, and he himself also welcomed him ashore with a chariot drawn by 4 white horses. Plato asked for the promised recall of Dion, and in addition for land and men, so that they might live there in accordance to the constitution of his republic. Although Dionysius had promised this, he drew back from his fulfilling it. But when Plato publicly accused Dionysius of having broken faith, first with Plato himself over the reinstatement of Dion, and then with Plato's Theodotus over the protection of Heraclides, he had Dionysius as an enemy from that moment. Hence, he continually lived in great danger of being killed by Dionysius's soldiers. But Archidas of Tarentum and Lemniscus, the orator of Dionysius, with a ship, asking him to let Plato go. Dionysius released him, giving him provisions, and Plato returned home. Shortly afterwards, Dionysius paid the penalty for his crime committed against philosophy.
being driven from his seat of tyranny by Dion and the people. Plato was welcomed back to his own country in high honor. There, he was invited to enter the service of the state, but was unwilling to accept, as the people had accustomed themselves to evil ways. Those to whom Plato gives laws. It is said that the Arcadians and Thebans, who had established a state of respectable size, asked him to set it up as a republic, but when he understood that they were unwilling to pursue the ideal of equality, he did not proceed. However, he did give laws to the Syracusans when the tyrant had been driven out. For the Cretans he wrote laws, arranged in 12 books, soon after the city of Magnesia had been founded. From those closest to him he sent to Aristomenes to instruct the Arcadians in the laws. He sent Phormio to the Eleans, and the Menedemus to the Pyrians. Plato, self-restraint, dignity, and affability. He lived single. His life was wholly temperate and, as St. Augustine asserts, chaste. Hence in old age he is said to have made sacrifice to nature to free himself, in the view of the people, from the charge of childlessness. As a young man he had such a sense of propriety and such composure that he was never caught laughing except modestly. But no one saw him angry. Hence, when a boy who had been educated under Plato returned to his parents and saw his father shouting, he said, "Never did I see this with Plato. Only once was he inwardly somewhat angry with a boy who was doing serious wrong. But he said to Xenocrates, 'You beat this boy, for I cannot, as I am angry.' No matter what the day, he would eat only once, or, if twice, very sparingly. He used to sleep alone. He would strongly condemn a contrary way of life. Like his own Socrates, too, he seemed somewhat inclined to loving of youths, but, in the same measure as both were disposed to the sensuous, they were restrained by reason. How spiritual was their love, and how what they said about love may be expounded, we have dealt with adequately in our book on love. Plato chose to bequeath a memorial of himself, both in his books and in his friends. Although, as Aristotle writes, he was melancholy and of a profound nature, and yet he used to make many jests, as he frequently reminded the rather austere Xenocrates and Dion to sacrifice the graces so that they would be made more agreeable and gracious. Plato's affability, however, was combined with dignity. Pupils were Speusippus of Athens, Xenocrates of Chalcedon, Aristotle of Stagira, Philip of Opus, Hastius of Perinthus, Dion of Syracuse, Amyclus of Heraclea, Lasthenia of Mantinea, and Aethia of Philius, who both wore men's clothes. It is said that Theophratus, too, heard him speak, as did Hyperides, the orator, and the chameleon, the Lycurgus, Demosthenes, and he was devoted to him. At the entrance to the academy was inscribed, "No one lacking geometry may enter here," which, indeed, he wished to be understood as not only to the measurement of lines, but due to measure and the state of mind as well. Plato's books. He wrote a book, Euthyphro, on holiness. He wrote the Apologia of Socrates, Crito,
on what Crito discussed with Socrates in prison, Phaedo on the immortality of the soul, Cratylus on the proper consideration of names, Theaetetus on knowledge, the sophist on being, the statesman on government, Parmenides on the single origin of all things and on the ideal forms, Philebus on the highest good, the Symposium on love, Phaedrus on beauty, Alcibiades 1 on the nature of man, Alcibiades 2 on prayer, Hipparchus on the desire for gain, Amorites on philosophy, Theages on wisdom, Charmides on temperance, Laches on courage, Lysis on friendship, the refutive dialogue of Euthymidemus, Protagoras on ethics, Gorgias on rhetoric, Meno on virtue, Hippias Major on beauty, Hippias Minor on falsehood. 10 books on the Republic, Timaeus on the nature of the universe, Critias on the ancient Attica, Minos on law, 12 books on the laws, Epinomus called the philosopher, and 13 epistles. We ourselves have translated all these books of Plato from Greek into Latin. There are 3 kinds of Platonic dialogue, that is so to say. In one he refutes the sophists, in another he encourages the youth, and in the third he teaches adults. What Plato himself says in his letters or his books on the laws, and in the Epinomus, he wishes to be taken as completely true, whereas what he discusses through the mouths of Socrates, Timaeus, Parmenides, and Zeno in other books is to be taken as probable. The eloquence, wisdom, and authority of Plato. The style of Plato, as Aristotle says, flows midway between prose and poetry, and is of such sweetness and fullness that Cicero said that Plato was the greatest authority and master, both in understanding and teaching. He added that if Jupiter had wished to speak with a human tongue, he would have spoken none other than with the tongue of Plato. Indeed, such great teaching was in him that, whereas before him all enlightened Greeks had traveled abroad to foreign peoples for wisdom's sake, after the time of Plato all nations streamed as one into Athens. Even Aristotle, endowed with such wonderful and natural abilities and eager for a new way of thinking, listened to Plato's words for 20 years continuously, although he was merely an adult when he came to him. Added to which, before he came to Plato, he was already advanced in his studies. From then on, he had only Plato as a teacher. Let me quote what Cicero writes: "I prefer to err with Plato than to feel I am right with everyone else." Further, with Panaetius, he calls him the god of philosophers. And Quintilian writes, who doubts that Plato is foremost both in the penetration of his argument and in the divine eloquence of his speech, for his language rises so far above the prosaic and what Greeks call pedestrian speech, that to me he seems to be instinct not with human genius, but with Delphic utterance. Through godly wisdom and uprightness he seems to have obtained for himself a wonderful authority, even in his own country, which very rarely happens. When, on his return from Sicily, Plato arrived at the most magnificent assembly of the Olympic Games, which seemed like a gathering of the whole world, he was received with such joyful greetings from all, it was as though a god had been sent from heaven to mortal men. You would have seen the games deserted, the athletic contests abandoned, the boxers left to themselves, and what is more remarkable, people who had come such long journeys over land and sea to feast their eyes, ears, and minds on the Olympic Games, forgetful now of all pleasure, were coming to Plato and gazing upon him. In Plato, as in a most delightful hospice, they found their rest. When a young man was reciting a tragedy with no one present but Plato, some objected that it was degrading him for that only one person should be there. He replied, "But this one man is more than the whole Athenian people." The charity, magnanimity, and holiness of Plato. How great and constant he was in spirit, particularly in the cause of his friends, is shown by his letters, his contempt for a tyrant, and his defense of Dion. Often Plato argued boldly with the tyrant, even in the presence of witnesses, since he said the tyrant governed unjustly and deceived his own friends. So far was Plato from flattering him. Let me add some minor details. Thus, at a feast, Dionysius had ordered everyone to dance dressed in a purple. Aristippus promptly danced, but Plato declined, saying that women's things did not become a philosopher. Further, the corrupt accuser, Crobylus, had laid an accusation against the courageous general Chabrias, and had threatened him with the sentence of death. In these circumstances, when the general, deserted by all the other citizens and fearing danger, went up to the fortress, only Plato stood by him all the time, ready to give help. The slanderer Crobylus, to prevent him from defending Chabrias, said threateningly, "You press forward to assist the defense of other people, not heeding that the poison of Socrates awaits you too." Plato replied, "In days gone by, Crobylus, when I fought for the honor of my country, I was not slow to face dangers which had to be borne. Now, for duty and for the safety of a friend, I will not turn from any crisis, even though you may threaten sword, poison, and fire." When Socrates had been in prison most unjustly, Plato collected money to buy the release of the innocent man, and while the trial was in progress, he ascended the platform and began to speak thus: "O men of Athens, although I am younger than all those here who have mounted the tribunal, than the tyrannical judges, fearing that his authority and eloquence might move the citizens, suddenly interrupted and shouted, 'Get down!' Plato left for home, for he was suffering from some bodily sickness, just as they were suffering from sickness of the mind. In fact, Socrates' prosecutors paid the penalty soon afterwards. One of the fellow disciples of Xenocrates was pricked by jealousy that Xenocrates was so favored and close to Plato. In order to arouse hostility against Xenocrates, he reported many malicious sayings of Xenocrates against Plato. Plato listened, but rejected the charge as he was speaking. The malicious critic stood his ground, with hardened countenance, affirming the charge. At length, Plato, to free himself from the tenacity of the men who was calling on all the gods and goddesses to bear witnesses, said, "Be it so, but Xenocrates is so strong in faith, and is of such dignity, that unless he had judged it to be useful, he would never have said these things." Diogenes, the life of Xenocrates, bears witness that Xenocrates, the beloved disciple of Plato, imitated his dignity and magnanimity, and Xenocrates' life is indeed an example of fortitude and devotion. Plutarch is a witness that Dion too imitated Plato. Further,
Philiscus, describing the life of the orator Lycurgus, says, Lycurgus was a great man, and many things were brilliantly accomplished by him which no man could have done who had not been a pupil of Plato. When fleeing from Antipater, Demosthenes said to Archias, who was promising to save his life with fawning words, Far be it from me that, after I have heard both Xenocrates and Plato discoursing on the immortality of the soul, I should prefer to live with shame rather than to die with honor. The same man, writing to a certain Heracleidorus, his fellow student, reproached him because, after he had listened to Plato, he neglected good studies, and he led a life of little honor. He said, Do not feel ashamed to be neglecting what you have learned from Plato. Dionysius, writing to Speusippus, says, Plato used to teach without charge those who frequented his house, but you exact fees, and take them from those who are willing to pay and those who are not. Lortius also criticizes Speusippus for not, in contrast to Xenocrates, imitating Plato's purity, fortitude, and gentleness. I cannot be silent about Xenocrates' courage when Dionysius said to Plato, Someone will take off your head. Xenocrates, who was there, said, No one cuts off that head without first cutting off mine. Maxims and sayings of Plato. Plato used to say this about Aristotle and Xenocrates. Oh, what have I taken on to be yoked together? A horse and an ass. Aristotle needs the bridle, but Xenocrates needs the spur. There was amongst his disciples an over-fastidious young man, too concerned about his external appearance. Plato asked him, How long will you go on, building a prison for yourself? As often as he might see a man ensnared by love, he used to say, That man is dead in his own body, he lives in another's. He would add, He who deserts his own self for the sake of another is of all men the most miserable, since he no longer possesses either himself or the other. A certain close friend of Plato, a well-learned man, was pleading with Plato to listen for a while, as he was intent on reading a paper he had produced. Whereupon Plato asked what was the title of the work. He answered, Do not contradict. Plato said to him, Why then are you doing so yourself? Why contradict contradictors? Why consult me, since you do not allow yourself to be contradicted? A powerful citizen, Leo, was publicly criticized for making a loud and excessive uproar in the Senate. Plato said, This is truly being a lion. To Diogenes, the cynic, who maintained that he certainly saw mortal things but ideas not at all, Plato said, What a marvel! For you have eyes with which these mortal things are seen, and you use them, but you do not use the mind by which alone ideas are discerned. To some disciples, marveling that Xenocrates, throughout his life a grave man, had said something intended to be received with laughter, Plato said, What? Do you wonder that amongst thorns sometimes roses and lilies are born? To young men he often used to say, Put work before leisure, unless perhaps you think rust is better than brilliance. He used to fire the young children with enthusiasm for happy life, very often with this reasoning, Consider the contrary nature of virtue and pleasure, for the momentary sweetness of the latter is followed by sudden remorse and perpetual sorrow, but the brief toils of the former are followed by eternal delight. When he saw someone playing at dice, Plato rebuked him. When one man said, "What small matters you find fault with?" Plato replied, "On the contrary, habit is no small matter." He used to advise drunkards, to those prone to rage, to observe themselves attentively in a mirror. They would immediately turn their backs on such foulness. Drunkenness and idleness he abhorred. He used to say that in the education of the young, while it is most important that children should become accustomed to the delight only in those things which are honorable, otherwise, he used to say, pleasure is a bait for evils. He would add that the true health of the mind is love of wisdom. In truth, other powers seem to be not so much love of wisdom as embellishments. Nothing is sweeter for a healthy mind than to speak and hear true findings, for there is nothing better or more enduring than truth. To some people who asked what kind of possessions then should one chiefly provide for one's children, he said, those which would dread neither hailstorm, nor the violence of men, nor even Jove himself. To Demodocus, taking counsel about the instruction of his son, Plato said, there should be the same care in the begetting and rearing of children as there is in the planting and training of young trees. This rearing is work, the begetting pleasure. But beware lest we seem deeply asleep at the work, yet more than awake in the pleasure. To a certain Philidon, who was carping at Plato, because Plato was no less zealous and assiduous in learning than in teaching, and who was asking him how long he wished to be a student, Plato said, for as long as I have no cause to report being better and wiser. Asked what was the difference between a wise man and an ignorant man, he replied, the difference between a doctor and a sick man. He used to say that for princes there was no more excellent kind of surety for men in their position than to have retainers to whom trade was unknown. He said, to the prince, wisdom is as necessary as breath to the body. States will be most blessed if either philosophers rule, or at least, by some divine destiny, those who govern study philosophy. For nothing is greater scourge than power and boldness which are accompanied by ignorance. Also subjects are usually such as they see their princes to be. A magistrate should consider not his own but the public good. Not some part only, but the whole of the state should be his care. How lightly Plato regarded the human, how much he delighted in the divine. Every day he used to repeat, the eternal alone is true, the temporal only seems to be. The soul sleeps in the body, and those things that are the senses desire or fear are nothing but dreams. Thus all such things are to be thoroughly contemned. To avoid all evils which are plentiful in the world, we must flee to the eternal for refuge, for in no other way can evils be avoided. And he put into practice what he taught, for when both a hereditary right and the support of the citizens, he would have been a leader in the state. He totally rejected all public honor. When by inheritance from his father he became very rich, he showered all on his brothers, except for a small suburban estate called Academia. With this alone he lived content. Although he came to be a teacher and the friend to princes, yet he accepted no riches from them. King Dionysius used to say, Aristippus is always asking for money. Plato is always asking for books. In addition, he neither took a wife nor lived in the city. Free from all things, he served truth alone. Whence, St. Jerome says, despite great difficulties Plato traveled throughout Egypt, and to Archytas of Tarentum, and to that coast of Italy formerly called Magna Graecia, so that he who was in Athens was a master and a man of power, with whose teaching the halls of the academy resounded, becoming a pilgrim and a disciple, preferring humbly to learn from the words of others rather than, without modesty, to hold forth himself. Finally, while pursuing learning which seemed to flee before him round the whole globe, he was captured by pirates and sold into slavery. Furthermore, he served the cruelest tyrant. Captive, bound and enslaved, yet, because a philosopher, he was greater than the man buying him. Thus, Jerome. In piety and gratitude of Plato. He was filled with gratitude to God, for whom he used to say, the beginning of thinking, speaking and acting in all matters ought to be made, and he himself always put this into practice. Moreover, he gave thanks daily to God that he was born a man and not a brute, that he was born a Greek and not a barbarian, and that he was born in the time of Socrates. His dialogues, in which he wonderfully honors his teachers and all his friends, are testimony to how grateful he was to them all. And he ascribed his books to Socrates, for not only does he introduce him as disputant in almost all dialogues, but also writes that everything he had set down was not but his Socrates. What Plato affirmed and those who supported him. In matters subject to the senses, he used to support the views of Heraclitus. Then in that which pertained to the intellect, he would rest mainly with Pythagoras. But in matters affecting the community, he embraced his own Socrates. These are things which he asserted everywhere. God provides for all. The souls of men are immortal. There will be rewards for the good, punishments for the wicked. Augustine, in his book Against the Academics, says, the authority of Christ must be put before anything. However, if there is something to be done requiring the use of reason, he says he finds himself with the Platonists, for this is not contrary to the sacred Christian writings. Dionysius the Areopagite pointed out the same. Later, Eusebius and Cyril explained it more fully. Hence, Augustine, on his book On the True Religion, says, excuse me, if a few things were changed, the Platonists would become Christians. And, in the Confessions, he relates that he has found nearly all the opening words of John the Evangelist in the works of the Platonists. Therefore, in the second book of the City of God, he says, Labeo, the pagan theologian, thought that Plato should be numbered with the demigods, like Hercules and Romulus. Furthermore, he places demigods above heroes. Both he sets among the divine powers. Nevertheless, I have no doubt that Plato, whom he calls a demigod, should be preferred, not only to the heroes, but even to the gods themselves. Whence, he says that he chose the Platonists before other philosophers, as they had much truer understanding of divine human matters than the rest. Also, Marcus Varro had earlier come to this conclusion, and Apuleius regarded Plato as not merely superior to the heroes, but equal to the gods, since he had evidently penetrated the innermost secrets of divine matters. Plato was endowed with such modesty that, although he had won himself marvelous authority above others, even so, when he was asked by someone for how long his precepts should be obeyed, he replied, until someone holier appear on earth to uncover the fountain of truth for all, whom in the end all will follow. He added that he had discovered nothing by his own light, but much by the divine light. However, what he observed in philosophy we have discussed adequately in our books on love and the theology. Plato's return to his celestial land and praises of him. It was on his birthday that he departed life, when he had fulfilled 81 years, and not a day less. For this reason, the Magi were then in Athens made a sacrifice to Plato. They reckoned his lot to be greater than that of a human being, since he had fulfilled the most perfect number, which is the product of 9 times 9. And, what is a marvel, he was still writing at that age on that very day, about which Cicero says, "There is also the calm and gentle old age of quiet and pure life, lived with good judgment." Such, we are told, was that of Plato, who died while writing at 81 years of age. Seneca also affirms that Plato reached this age by means of even-mindedness and care. Some affirm that he returned to the gods above while writing, others that he returned in mid-discourse, while reclining after the meal had been cleared at a wedding feast. Aristotle consecrated an altar and a statue to Plato in a temple with this inscription. That is, Aristotle has dedicated this altar to Plato, a man whom it is sacrilege for bad men to praise. Aristotle added, by his life, his teaching, his conduct, and his speech, he alone gave guidance to all men, and handed on his writings so that through virtue they may be able to lead a happy life. No future age will bring forth such a man. And another wise men have added many verses to the praise of Plato, but above all 3 epitaphs. This is the meaning of the first. He excelled all men in temperance and justice, but was so far above them in wisdom that he completely overcame all envy. This is the sense of the second. Plato has been removed from the world to be numbered among the gods. Distant nations honor him, for he had knowledge himself of the divine life, and showed it to others. The third sentence is like this. Phoebus begat Aesculapius and Plato. Aesculapius to heal bodies, Plato to heal souls. Furthermore, Mithridates, the king of Persians, added in the academy a statue of Plato with this inscription. Mithridates, the Persian son of Arantobades, has dedicated this image of Plato to the Muses. From all this Plato attained such a reputation that, although the Greeks placed Aristotle among the spirits, they named Plato the divine, because it is clear that, in the main, Aristotle's life was earthly and his knowledge natural, whereas Plato, at once by knowledge and by his life, devoted himself above all to the divine. An apologia on the character of Plato. I shall now draw to a close, once I have added a few more words. There are some more common rhymesters, who, without meriting it, usurp for themselves the name of the poet, roused as much by the difference in conduct as by the malice of envy. They mock shamelessly any man of excellence, and to these men a certain supreme license is allowed, against good men but rather bad, especially in our time. But let me not be mindful of our times, which are incapable of pursuing virtue, as they seem to be well capable of persecuting it. Accordingly, in former times, Such petty poets did not hesitate to sink their teeth into the divine Plato, considered by the Greeks to be the son of Apollo. Diogenes Laertius utterly detested the impiety of these poets, and, as Diogenes declares, Aristippus of Cyrene, the most wicked man of his time, and adversely the best one of his time, also added to the facetious abuse of the comic poets, just as Aristippus slandered many other very virtuous and learned men with false stories, so even slandered Socrates, his teacher, and his own fellow pupils, Xenophon and Plato. He made up certain lascivious poems in their names about harlots and young boys, evidently so that, by falsely using the great philosophers as examples, he might procure a freer license to sin himself. But Aristotle, to whom truth was more dear than Plato, could not tolerate such false calumny against a holy man. For his elegies to Eudemus, he recites those words about Plato which we have quoted above, paying him the greatest tribute. Not only must not slander Plato in any way, but even under the pretext of praise, they should not dare to utter his holy name through their profane mouths. And he was not content with an elegy, but also, according to Olympiodorus, composed a brilliant oration in praise of Plato. Therefore, let the hounds of hell be silent in the world of the living, and together with Apuleius of Madura, let us freely proclaim, we, the family of Plato, know nothing except what is bright, joyful, celestial, and supreme. 20. To the very degree that astronomers measure, astrologers misrepresent. Marsilio Ficino to Bernardo Bembo, the distinguished lawyer and knight. Greetings. 1,000 blessings upon you, my Bernardo. But I have not uttered enough. A blessing upon you with each breath, sweetest Bernardo. Though I write a great many words to you every day, I transcribe few. For when I have written the original, I seem, in some measure, to have satisfied love. Nay, if I were to transcribe from duty, I would give very little satisfaction. But now, to inform you of our present studies, I am composing a book on the providence of God and the freedom of human will, in which I refute, to the best of my ability, those pronouncements of the astrologers which remove providence and freedom. Indeed, as carefully as true astronomers measure the heavens, so do vain astrologers misrepresent human affairs. Farewell. Most idle hand, why do you neglect for so long to mention that true and illustrious Tommaso, Acades of that Bernardo, who was once Venetian ambassador? Tommaso, whom my soul gladly embraces and my tongue magnifies? So, Bernardo, as often as you see him, greet him in Marsilio's name. 14th June, 1477. 21. You commend someone most highly when you show him to belong to the one to whom you make the commendation. Marsilio Ficino to Marco Aurelio, the illustrious orator. Greetings. If it were in order to commend to you what is your own, I should very strongly commend you to Niccolo, a member of my household, who is endowed with both education and character. That he is indeed your own is shown to us by your name, which very frequently sounds on his lips. 22. Since love is kindled by the breath of a divine spirit, when one loves, the other always returns love. Often, when one thinks, the other thinks the same. Marsilio Ficino to Bernardo Bembo, the distinguished lawyer, and night. Greetings. Bernardo, I have today received from our Marco Aurelio a letter, which even in its very form is entirely mercurial, and in all aspects similar to its father. Yet, I judge it to have been born with Saturn in the ascendant. Certainly, it has been moving with rather ponderous steps since it left Venetian waters on the 16th of May and finally reached our shores on the 19th of June. Clasping it with utmost joy, I congratulate it. You have come at last, and your devotion has overcome the hard journey. Although it appeared to be rather slow in its motion, as if born under Saturn, it is seemed to have been very swift in its work, as if conceived by Mercury. For what it asks of us today, it has itself long since fulfilled, while being born. Indeed, in those same days of May, when the golden Aurelio wrote to me, I, moved by some mysterious and well-nigh divine impulse, either from his letter or his muse, dedicated to Aurelio a little work, which, I think, unless also saturnine in its pace, will already have reached you. Bernardo, just consider the wonderful power of our guardian spirits. While that Marco was giving himself freely to me, I, in return, in obedience to the law, was giving myself wholly to him, and, cause of wonder, as he with love was taking hold of me, I was encompassing him. And so, by the breath of a heavenly spirit, we have simultaneously and almost unknowingly breathed as one. Indeed, I judge that either Mercury himself positioned in Taurus or Phoebus in Gemini has turned alike the twin lyres of Aurelio and Marsilio, so that with the sounding of one the other in turn resounds, and from both that sweet name of Bembo reverberates, a name musical to the Graces and most gratifying to the Muses. Fare prosperously, but I see that my Bernardo, for I have come to know the man's nature, is neither able nor willing ever to fare well without those in whom he delights. Cristoforo Landino, a man worthy of Minerva and the Muses, and our fellow philosopher Giovanni Cavalcanti. Farewell, and so farewell. 19 June 1477. 23. Since love is kindled by the breath of a divine spirit, when one loves, the other always returns love. Often when one thinks, the other thinks the same. Marsilio Ficino of Florence to a Marco Aurelio, the illustrious orator. Greetings. Your elegant letter was delivered to us yesterday, most learned Marco. A letter sweeter to me than honey and more precious than gold. But what am I to do? It is not lawful for me to proceed further with this praise, lest I seem too vain in attempting myself to praise sufficiently a letter which praises me more than sufficiently. So, if you please, let us begin again from another point. Since love is kindled in our hearts by the breath of some celestial spirit, when one loves, the other always returns love, and often when one is thinking, the other is thinking the same thing in the same way. For since the Heavenly Father, as the common cause of all things, enfolds both, he creates the mutual love of the lovers, and the love of the lover proceeding from heaven through man reflects back now in the earthly face of humanity, then in the vaults of heaven. In turn, it gives birth, echo. So welcome, heavenly friend, welcome always in God, the author of our friendship. Neither distance on earth nor span of time, Marco, seem to have been able to interrupt the rise or retard the course of this our heavenly, perpetual love. No, by a divine bond, when one loves, soon the other shall love. Moreover, when one thinks and writes, at almost the same moment, the other will think and write the same. I think you will have observed, Aurelio, if you have received that little work of mine, recently sent to you, that at the very time you were writing to me, I, in turn, was also writing to you. Furthermore, that each of us signaled inwardly and then asked for the same thing. For me, nothing is more fruitful in human affairs than through love to have become equal to one whom, as I am aware, no one excels in virtue. Nothing is more precious than so fortunately to possess one of such quality and stature as my possessor. So I have what I was seeking with my whole heart, but I am somewhat troubled in this one respect, that I am by no means wholly that which you yourself were seeking. If you cannot have what you may desire, my Aurelio, you may at least desire what you can have. Accept your Marsilio whole, Marco, however short he may be. Look no further, I beg you, at that image which you had initially imagined, for Ficino is a limb of that image. Look at what you possess, my friend, rather than at what you imagine. Thus you will certainly realize that you possess not part of anything, but something whole. It is better to enjoy a whole pygmy rather than a limb of some huge giant. 24. Nothing is less constant than human love. Nothing more constant than divine love. Marsilio Ficino to Bernardo Bembo, lawyer and illustrious knight. Greetings. You write to us an eloquent, poetic, and loving letter. However, I do not know why you are needlessly making excuses, because absolutely no one is making accusations. Where love is perfect, beware lest you believe that in any tiny offense can either touch it. You can perhaps harm love in only one way, by believing that love can ever be harmed. Human love is indeed in a condition which is full of unceasing agitation and fear. But, if we listen to Paul, divine love believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things, and never faileth. Or to John the Evangelist, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out all fear. Hence our own St. Augustine explains, only he loses any beloved one, for whom all are beloved in that one who is never lost. But I do not know how I came to this point to begin a homily, as it is called, and was propounding the offices of love to the man whom the people of Florence revere as an image of love, and a model of humanity. 25. Vainly and to excess we strive for our satisfaction in those things which in no wise satisfy themselves. Marsilio Ficino to mankind. Greetings. You seek satisfaction everywhere, on the principle that after you have found this one thing, you will search for nothing further. But you are always seeking anew as many things as possible, for the very reason that nowhere do you attain this one thing. So do you wish me to say that you attain satisfaction nowhere? Perhaps because it is outside yourself that you are seeking. If, therefore, mortal possessions cannot satisfy the immortal soul, at least take care of what the soul itself may be given satisfaction to mortal things. Mark what I say. I do not say that the soul should satisfy itself, for how can that which is formed and perfected by another satisfy itself? Alas, pitiable creatures, how much wasted effort! We seek out satisfaction in those things which in no wise satisfy themselves. In truth, only that which satisfies itself satisfies things wholly. Nothing, however, can satisfy itself but the immeasurable good which comes from itself and returns to itself. Here alone then, here, I say, we should seek that which will satisfy us, nor will this bring regret, for no one ever follows the good in vain, who follows it truly. For the good itself, being without measure, blooms and comes forth in abundance from every point, and our desire to follow it truly is without doubt something good. But he alone truly desires and follows the good who, by grace of the supreme good itself, through which individual good things have their being and are preserved, follows at every step individual things that are good.
Marsilio Ficino to Riccardo Anghiari, the distinguished theologian from Anghiari. Men engaged in civil life often speak out against philosophers because they seem, for the most part, ill-fitted for the government of human affairs. Philosophers in return condemn even more frequently those engaged in civil affairs for not being totally unfit for the contemplation of the divine. So what shall we ourselves say about this? It is not for us to settle disputes of such magnitude between these men, but our Plato, whom God himself especially prepared for both human and divine matters, should be summoned here as arbiter. Accordingly, he observes that from the beginning both men of affairs and philosophers have been ordained to fulfill either office, if only they would not move suddenly from one extreme to the other, but step by step. Here it is the best to translate Plato's Greek itself, word for word, from the 7th book of the Republic. And now you may contemplate our nature with respect to learning and ignorance by such an image as this. An underground cave. Its entrance, facing an incipient light, gives access to the entire cave, affording a passage through every direction. In it are men reared from childhood, bound neck and leg, so they are forced to remain immobile and to look only to the front. They cannot even turn their heads, bound as they are with chains, and behind their backs, high and far off, hangs a fiery torch. Between this fire has been built, it is like a stage or curtain which puppet masters, feigning miracles, often place before the eyes of spectators, and above which they demonstrate their wonders. Now imagine men beneath the wall, bearing various vessels and man-made objects, which show above the wall. Statues of men and images of different animals, fashioned in various ways from stone and wood. And, as you might expect, some of those who bear these are silent and some speaking. Likewise, ourselves are those bound men. For, firstly, do you think they see anything at all of themselves or of the men nearest them, except shadows cast by the fire upon the opposite side of the cave? And of those objects which are being carried off about, do they not see merely shadows?
So if they were allowed to speak with one another, would they not express the opinion that those things which they saw facing them were speaking? Suppose an echo were to ring out from the opposite side of the dungeon whenever one of those passing behind spoke. Would you not think that they would believe that it was but the shadows of the things passing across that spoke? In every way, therefore, such men would consider there was nothing true except shadows of man-made objects. Now consider, on the other hand, what the release from their bonds and the remedy for their ignorance would be like. No doubt if one of them were to be released and forced to rise suddenly, to turn his neck, walk and look towards the light itself, he would be immediately in pain, and not be able, on account of the brilliance, to look upon those things whose shadows he had previously seen. What, then, if someone were to tell him that he had hitherto gazed at illusions, and that he was now closer to real things, and was perceiving them more accurately? What if someone, pointing to one of those passing by, were to ask what it was? Do you not think that he would be confused and believe that those things which he had seen previously were more real than those which were now being shown? And if someone forced him to look at the light, do you not think he would be stricken with pain in the eyes? And would he not cast his eyes back to those things which before he had seen with ease, counting them to be more sure than those which were suddenly presented? Indeed, if anyone were to drag him violently upward through rough, steep places, not allowing him to look at anything, before dragging him to the light of the sun, do you not think he would rather bear it ill while being torn away? And while he had been led forth to the light, his eyes suffused with the brilliance, would he not be at a loss and see none of those things which he now considered real by men? He therefore needs to first accustom himself, if he is going to look at things above, and in the beginning he will look more easily upon shadows. After this he will more readily behold the reflections of men and other things in water, next objects themselves, and then those things which are in the sky, and he will behold the heaven itself more easily by night, whilst he observes the light of the stars and moon, than if he were to look at the day at the sun itself and the full brightness of its light. And thus at length he will raise his eyes to the sun itself, not looking at images of it in water, and in places other than its own, but observing it in itself, in accordance with itself, in its proper place, and he will be able to recognize it as it is. He will at length perceive that it is which regulates the seasons and years, and rules all things under heaven, and is in some way the author of whatever was previously seen by him and his fellows. What if he returns in memory to the original habitation and the wisdom of those men and fetters? Do you not think he would count himself blessed in the change of place, and yet pity those others? If they, moreover, presented honors and praise to each other, and rewards were given to him who's sharp in discerning any of the passing objects, recollected most fully which ones were wont to go before, which after, which together, and from these which best predicted what was to come, do you suppose that he himself would long for these things, and would consider those men happy who were honored and dominant amongst them? Or would he not, as Homer says, choose a fate in a foreign land, even that of being made a slave to another slave on a contrary estate, and enduring no matter what else, rather than being fooled by such beliefs and live in such wretchedness?
If he descends again and takes up the same seat as before, he will not be overcome by the darkness, since he has so suddenly parted from the sun. And if it is necessary to distinguish between those shadows and make judgments about them, with the men that held fast by perpetual fetters, if an opinion has to be offered at the very time when his eyes are full of darkness, and before his vision has cleared, which indeed will not happen in a short time, will he not excite derision? And dishonor will be imputed to him by all, because after ascending to the upper regions, he has returned with his eyesight ruined, and it will be said that one should never strive towards the upper realm, and whoever tries to release another and lead him upwards is, if caught, to be killed instantly. This entire allegory, my friend, should be related to our previous discussion. Thus our dungeon relates to that fabric of the world which is discerned by the eyes, whilst the light of the fire in the cave refers to the power of the sun. Finally, you will not be mistaken if you compare, as I hope you will, the ascent towards the upper realms and the vision of them, to that ascent which is directed towards the world of intellect. Since you desire to hear my opinion, God knows if it to be true, this is how it appears to me. As I judge, beyond any doubt, the idea of the good itself stands supreme in the world of intellect, and as seen with difficulty. Yet, if it is seen, it must be asserted that in all things it is the cause of all that is right and good, since, in the visible region, it has itself created light and the source of light, and reigning in the world of intellect, it has brought forth truth and mind. And it is necessary that the whole idea of the good to be known by anyone who with right mind is to undertake any action either privately or in public. Well now, consider this, and do not be surprised that those who come down to this place do not want to handle human affairs, but rather always direct the keen edge of their mind to the world above. Indeed, this is the most probable if we were to follow the former allegory. Furthermore, why should you marvel if one who has come down from the sight of the divine wonders to see the human ills is less capable of acting and is ridiculed, especially if, before he comes accustomed to the present darkness, and while still reeling, he is forced to give evidence in courts of law or elsewhere about the shadows of what is lawful, or the statues which cast these shadows, and to discuss the judgments of those who have never seen justice herself. Yet, any man of reason will remember that the eyes may be confused in two ways, and from two causes. Firstly, when we come down from light to shadow, and secondly, when we go forth from darkness into sunlight. He will deem the mind to be affected in the same way. Whenever he seems confused and slower at distinguishing anything, therefore, he will by no means burst thoughtlessly into laughter, but will carefully inquire whether the mind, in descending from a pure existence, has been overwhelmed by unaccustomed darkness, or whether, rising from utter folly to the vision of brilliance, it has failed beneath such dazzling splendor. And indeed, he will not approve the condition of the mind in the second instance, and judge that its life will be blessed. Yet, he will pity it in the first. But if by chance he does begin to laugh, it will be less out of place for him to laugh at one who is ascending than at one who has fallen from the light above. Thus says the divine Plato,
and nothing should be taken away from these words, nor can anything be added to them. Therefore, farewell. 27. That the soul is immortal, and why, through it being divine, it often leads to a life similar to that of a beast. Marsilio Ficino to Giovanni Nessi, distinguished by his writings and conduct. Greetings. Were there not within us divine power, and were our minds not of heavenly origin, we could in no way acknowledge the insignificancy of mortal things, and we should certainly never reason beyond or pursue anything above the physical level. No one would exert himself at all, even in the smallest matter, to resist the body, for we should be satisfied with earthly riches, and all men, or certainly the great majority, would rest content with this middle region of the universe as their natural birthplace and home. But as it is, since our condition is very different, I believe, and with no empty faith, that we are of divine origin. Yet, if we are divine, why do we often lead a life similar to that of a beast? Is it because the natural condition of this region determines that we use sense like an animal long before we use reason like men? Furthermore, far more numerous and more obvious inducements present themselves to our senses than to our minds. Lastly, the man in us is one, but the beasts are many. It is worthwhile considering that picture of us which Plato paints in the 9th book of the Republic. Thus, let us fashion an image of the soul similar to the natures once said to have been possessed by the Chimera, Scylla, Cerberus, and many others, in which, they say, a variety of forms was begotten in one body. So picture a single model of a beast of many forms, having heads facing all directions. Some, I say, are the heads of tame beasts, and some of wild, all of which it can generate from itself and interchange with each other. Above these add the form of a lion, and at the top of one a man. Let the first one described to be the largest, the second, and the third smaller. Then join these three so that they coalesce and make one. Surround them with the form of a single man, so that to one who is unable to look within but only on the surface, who discerns only the covering, the man seems clearly to be one being. Thus, to him who asserts that profits this human being to act unjustly, but that it does not profit him at all to live justly, let us point out that he is asserting just this, that it profits the human being to be fed on the manifold beast and the lion, and to make them both stronger, but to allow the man to starve, and to be so weakened that because of his feebleness he is dragged in whatever direction the other two carry him off. He should not make them gentle or friendly with one another. Rather, should he allow them as separate creatures to savage one another, and their conflicts to devour them alike. Accordingly, the man who declares that just actions are profitable will advise that ought to be said and done to enable the man within a being of this kind to achieve a complete mastery. He should tend the many-headed monster like a husbandman, cherishing the tame heads, giving them water and food, but instantly cutting off the wild ones, making the lion's nature his ally in this, and in common care of all of them. he should reconcile each one with the others in mutual goodwill towards himself. And so, from every consideration, he who praises what is just speaks truth, but he who praises what is unjust lies. For in relation to pleasure, honor, and advantage, the commander of justice proclaims truth, but he who slanders justice speaks no truth, nor does he know what he condemns. Thus far, a similar division of our soul is described in Plato's Timaeus. There he divides the soul into three powers, as into parts, whose natures are reason, passion, and desire. He has appointed the power of reason to the head, queen, as it were, in the highest citadel, chiefly because the head, more than anything else, seems to exert itself in watching, and it is there that all senses are most vigorous. Next, he has set the power of passion in the region of the heart, since is in anger, boldness, and fear that this region is most agitated. Lastly, he has given the power of desire to the liver, because its natural vigor lends itself to both the digestion of food and to the growth of bodily craving. Likewise, in Phaedrus, he calls reason the charioteer, since in the order of nature it is master of the other parts. To the charioteer he links twin horses, one white and one black. As he sees this analogy, the horses are the powers of the heart and the liver, because these should submit to reason as to a charioteer. Magnanimity, which is accorded to the heart, is said to be the white horse, for it is closer to reason. But the liver's power of desire is the black horse, since it is farther away from the preeminence of reason. Then, again, reason within us is called Hercules. He destroys Antaeus. That is the monstrous image of fantasy, when he lifts Antaeus up from the earth. That is, when he removes himself from the senses of the physical images. He also subdues the lion, meaning that he curbs passion. He cuts down the hydra with its many sprouting heads. That is, he cuts off the force of desire, which, a passion, is born not into a few things, and those of great importance, but into anything whatsoever, or rather, into innumerable things, by means of an insatiable whirlpool. But while our Hercules is cutting down the hydra of the liver with his sword, heads instantly sprout again, because the fuel for new heads is still there. But when he consumes the hydra by fire, he utterly destroys the fuel, and so nothing is born from it again. In Plato's Phaedo, Socrates commands thus: "Do not abstain from one bodily pleasure to gratify another. Otherwise, in place of the one, many are instantly reborn." On the contrary, he enjoins us to try to abstain from pleasures for the sake of reason, for only thus is it possible, he says, to root out vices at the source. Let me now bring this letter to an end, but may I first remind you of this one thing, which clearly we should bear in mind. If the wild beasts within us are many, it is not surprising that according to Plato, souls are transmigrating from man to beasts. Certainly, we have within us, from the beginning, fuel for desire and something of animal nature. When we have heedlessly nourished these for a long time, reason is either in some way lulled to sleep, or else it is awake under a cloak of passion and desire. Wherefore, under that human skin, the man himself seems to have been transformed into beasts. Hence, Socrates says in Phaedrus, "Indeed, I examine myself, Phaedrus, Am I monster with more heads than Typhon, more full of fire and fury? Or am I a simpler and calmer being, sharing in some divine and favorable destiny, partaking in a quiet understanding? 1st of July, 1477. 28. He alone possesses all things, who is inwardly possessed by nothing but God. Marsilio Ficino, to his beloved fellow priest, Girolamo Pasqualini, greetings. If you desire to possess as many things as possible, take care that nothing possesses you within. For unless you have possession of yourself, through whom you may possess other things, you will have nothing at all. Hence, it is because that all men are always in want, that they all continually grieve, because clearly each of them has for a long time too rashly lost and wasted himself, and everything else with himself. Inwardly each is taken captive, while outwardly he strives to capture. He alone can belong at once to himself and to another, who has given himself to that one alone who, among all things, is alone for this very reason, that he alone is all things. For when a man finds all things in this one, he also finds himself, as much more perfect than himself as in that one. Just as he who serves someone in bondage is in bondage, in most vile and wretched bondage, so he serves the Lord of all things, becomes in measure the Lord of all things. He alone seems to serve freely, who submits to the will of infinite freedom. Service is free where boundless freedom, that is, God, casts out whatever may be thought subject to bondage or force. 30. He has many servants who serves many. Marsilio Ficino to Bernardo Bembo of Venice. Greetings. Fibo Capella, Francesco d'Este, and Panfilo, the physician, are asking us for the works of our Plato, all of which were translated some time ago from Greek into Latin. If by chance you should discover these distinguished men anywhere, greet them for me, and say that the translations cannot be sent this month. You see, Bernardo, with how great a freedom I treat you, for I seem to have been given a command, I know not how, but you, my Bembo, are the cause, for to each you should know yourself to be such a man, that he who does not make use of the greatest freedom and trust with you, certainly seems to be of all men the least free and least trusting. When you are serving others most freely, then are you most their master. But when others seem to have dominion over you, then do they most freely serve you? No mastery is lighter, more effective and less anxious than one of love. No service is more constant, more pleasing, and more plentiful than a free one. 1st of August, 1477. 31. Friendship between men cannot be kindled unless God breathes upon it. I wrote some days ago a letter briefly discussing a true friendship, which I addressed not to one of my friends especially, but without particular ascription to all friends equally. A little later, most Latin Barbaro, your fine letter was delivered to me, which catches me with the true bait of love, that is, with love itself, and calls the captive to love, and to love in such a way that you love yourself. Being one, now have you what has to desire. now have what was to have been for many. For our discussion on true friendship, intended a moment ago on the welfare of all my friends, you have suddenly claimed for yourself in particular, so that what was to have been addressed to all is addressed to Marsilio alone. Therefore, just as previously, whilst writing to all, I was led to write to the one above all, so, after this, in loving all my friends, this one I will love above all. 32. Marsilio Ficino to his fellow philosophers, especially Marsilio Barbaro. Greetings. All men, by common consent, define friendship as a kind of union. Now, since there cannot be union except with one, it seems right to inquire that the one is to which two, aspiring with one accord, become friends and are known as friends. Are those who hold the same opinions necessarily friends? Not at all, for we may hold the same opinion on a great many things concerning both men and nature, and yet hate one another. So, perhaps, mutual goodwill consists not in opinion, but in desire. Consider, should those who desire the same be called friends, at least as long as they so desire? No, indeed. On the contrary, enmities are born from the very fact that we desire the same thing. Often those who covet the same treasure or official position or artistic honor grow jealous of one another, become angry and quarrel. Perhaps someone may say that such discord arises between men because they desire some finite goods, which one of them possesses but the other does not possess at all, or possesses unequally. But if men be found who seek the same good, because it is infinite, because it cannot anywhere be prevented from abounding without limit, then such men would not be agitated by any enmity as among themselves. One might say there is a friendship amongst those who desire that same infinite good. But not even this seems to be sufficient for mutual goodwill, for by some natural instinct all men desire good of this kind. From this we all desire to be happy, yet we do not love one another. Where then shall we find goodwill itself, which is nothing other than will of good, unless we find it within the compass of that good itself, which is all good, that is God? Certainly, we shall not find it anywhere else. Furthermore, as regards to this subject, the human will can be moved towards God in two principal ways. For it desires either to receive or to give. The first impulse is common and natural to everyone, since we all long for seek from God as many things as possible. But in spite of this, we neither love God nor men. The second impulse does not seem to exist equally in everyone. Certainly, very few are to be found who give up their very selves, and with themselves everything, to God, or rather, to speak more accurately, to give all things back to God. For we are nothing, and we possess nothing, which we have not received from Him. Whoever gives his very self back to God, that is to say, he who turns to God the whole labor and fruit of thought, desire, and action, he alone loves God for the sake of God Himself, and cherishes all else for God. The bootless lover of the bodily form cherishes just a body,
for the very reason that is only the form and substance of the body which he loves. In the same way, the true and devout lover cherishes created things simply because they are images or shadows of God the Creator, whom he loves. And the closer their resemblance, the more he marvels and gives praise. But most akin to the divine mind are minds which are dedicated to God before all else. And so, such minds are straightway drawn by ardor and sweetness of love beyond telling, towards both God and each other. As they first freely give themselves back to him as to a father, and then give themselves up in utter joy to each other as to brothers. All other so-called friendships between men are nothing but acts of plunder. True charity, as the Apostle Paul says, seeketh not its own, but the benefit of another. Although we daily take great pride in the honorable names of friendship, yet for the most part such is our nature that each of us considers no one other than himself. In truth, each does not yield himself to another, but rather takes pains to receive from him some pleasure or advantage relating in either outward things and the body or to the mind. And so, to sum up, I would say only that man is to be called a true and lawful lover who understands that in all the good things which at every point are presented to him and please him, nothing truly pleases him but the divine good itself, from which and through which all things are good. Thus he loves himself in all, and cherishes all in himself, in such a way that he does not love himself, save him through whom he has, which makes him worthy of being loved. Indeed, he cares his utmost for all men, as created with him more like his Father, but these he leads a heavenly life on earth, and in heaven a life that is beyond the heavens. Among these alone there is a true friendship, that is, true union from one and in one God. For a true and abiding union of many cannot be accomplished except through the eternal unity itself. But that true and eternal unity is God himself, who alone is true simplicity and boundless power. Therefore, it appears that only these men can freely proclaim the prophet, "Behold, how pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity."
33. Fortune can neither benefit the wicked nor harm the good. Marsilio Ficino to Antonio Avani of Sarzana. Greetings. If you see someone suffering from incurable physical illness, tormented by a variety of pains in different parts of the body, you will envy him with dainty feasts, his throng of attendants, soft pillows, robe of purple and gilded bedchamber? Of course you cannot, unless you are too sick, as sick in the mind as he is in the body. But those who are slave to pleasures or riches, the pursuit of fame or power, are beset by an incurable sickness of mind and by manifold suffering. So whoever looks enviously at such people sees nothing. That is why the most blind of all seem to me to be those who say that fortune is blind, because she benefits the wicked, for whom in truth nothing is good, for because she harms the good, for whom finally nothing is bad. For as a man is in himself, so for him is that which he receives. Only those who have been deprived of the eye of reason do not see with what wondrous reason each and every part of the universe is put in place and set in motion. Only those men, I would say, seem to be at the mercy of fortune, and the greatest injustice, who, when the precise ordering of things points to the infinite power, wisdom, and justice of the author, still either believe that unreasoning fortune is in command, or else complain of divine governance as it were less than just. 34. In praise of matrimony. Marsilio Ficino to Antonio Pilati, poet and excellent friend, greetings. I cannot but highly approve, my Piloti, the fact that you have long been applying your mind to matrimony. By matrimony, man, as if divine, continuously preserves the human race through succession. As through ingratitude, he returns to nature what he has received on loan, often with interest. Like a true and generous sculptor, he carves in his offspring a living image of himself. Moreover, it is only, or principally, through these means that he obtains loving companionship for life, and faithful guardianship of his affairs. He also has a domestic republic, in the governing of which he may exercise the powers of prudence and all the virtues. At the same time, he provides the greatest protection for his old age, which he may spend more serenely in the bosom of a beloved wife, or in the arms of sons or grandsons, or in the care of relatives by marriage. Finally, a wife and family offer us sweet solace from our labors, or at least the strongest incentive towards moral philosophy. Wherefore, Socrates used to confess that he had learnt so much moral philosophy from his wives than natural philosophy from Anaxagoras or Archelaus. Who would deny that from the time man has been created, nothing has been ordained or established for him by God which is more important and more ancient than matrimony, and that it is numbered among the sacred mysteries and held in the highest regard among all peoples? The powerful have always respected it, and the wise have not disdained it, having seen that it is conducive to the ordering of society and does not hinder learning, provided one lives temperately and spends one time carefully. Although in youth our Plato rather neglected matrimony, yet finally in old age, moved by repentance, he made sacrifices to the goddess of nature, thereby to absolve himself publicly from the charges, first, of having ignored matrimony, and, second, of being barren. And he proclaimed in his laws that a man who did not take a wife ought to be kept well away from all public duties and offices, and at the same time be burdened with public taxes more heavily than other citizens. Hermes Trismegistus says that men of this sort are judged to be wholly unfruitful by human law, and like dry and barren trees by divine law. Under divine law, only two kinds of men seem to be exempted: those who are quite unsuited to matrimony on account of some disability in their nature, or those who have devoted themselves to Minerva alone, as though they have pledged themselves to a wife. Nature herself excuses the former, while chaste Minerva would perhaps reproach her devotees if they were to pursue Venus. Nature, which has brought forth our Piloti, strong and handsome, would certainly have disapproved had he by the chance neglected matrimony, and if Minerva, whom he has long served, tries to reprove him for mixing Venus with the Muses, Apollo and Mercury, will come at once to his defense. They will surely say Pilati has dedicated to the sacred Muses more and better songs after his wedding than before it, Finally, these sublime beings will bid one their companion Mercury move as escorts to either side of Venus, mother of love and music, and walk with her almost step by step, so to speak, and never go far from her. But let us now leave the stars and return to mankind. I see you in the future, Antonio, frequently declaring in the following manner, within your own household, the benefits of taking a wife. Man alone, or man most of all, is a social being, as the philosophers say, and for this reason the power of speech and of formulating laws is bestowed by nature on him alone. One who has lived alone to see himself as somewhat greater than man, but more probable something less, since he who transcends human powers by amongst men rarer than the phoenix. He will play his part better than the rest of mankind if he has entered into a permanent and indissoluble family union. In this fellowship, let him strive to serve, to learn how to guide the society of mankind itself. Surely, just as the state consists of households, so skill in the state affairs consists of the judicious handling of family affairs. He who has not learned to govern his household will never know how to rule a state. He will never love his country while his believers have the blessings and his woes hardly apply to him. He would not care to instill more serious conduct into himself who, by living alone, does not provide a model of good conduct to a family. Anyone who is not occupied in family matters will each day become more neglectful and degenerate through idleness and license. He will never know how to love anyone truly and steadfastly if he does not experience the true and imperishable love of wife and children. He will never know to learn to endure the world, and by enduring to conquer, if he has not a family to teach him patience. He will not learn to feel compassion for men if he has never experienced a weeping wife or child. For indeed, if the mind is not unacquainted with this misfortune, it learns how to succor the afflicted. But worst of all is the man who does not know how to watch over his family, nor that God should frequently be invoked for their welfare. For the most part, he ignores the laws of mankind, men themselves, and the worship of God. In short, he will be exceedingly difficult to avoid, stripping man bare, unless we clothe him with the lawful mantle of matrimony. Wherefore, friends, if you wish to be men and lawful sons of God, increase the human race legitimately, and, just as you are like God, so in the fashion of God, beget sons like yourselves, nourish them, rule them, direct them, and remember, in family affairs which need to be so carefully directed, have due regard for yourselves, gain skill to acquire authority in the earthly commonwealth, be worthy of office in the heavenly commonwealth.
35. Philosophy gives birth to wisdom. Wisdom begets happiness. Marsilio Ficino to Sebastiano Salvini, his cousin. Greetings. When mighty and bountiful Juno does not heed us, before blaming the fates we should experience that the divine power, which, because it lives everywhere, is present in abundance for all who would be in its presence. It hears a man before he calls, gives heed to him who asks rightly. Therefore, Salvini, we should seek all our help from Minerva, so that one day we may raise ourselves from the earth and ascend to the upper world. Without doubt, the only power which can raise up to the celestial head of the universe is that which was born from the head of the supreme Jove himself.
But since it hearkens to no one except he ask rightly, let us strive our utmost, friend, to seek help from this source in the right way. Now, who rightly entreats wisdom, but he who does so wisely? But only he entreats wisdom wisely, from wisdom demands wisdom. We cannot seek anything wisely, either from her or from another, except through her. We cannot seek anything wisely, either from her or from another, except through her. We cannot wisely seek anything from her except herself. This has been taught us by Socrates, who was, in the judgment of Apollo, the wisest of all men. As Plato recounts in Phaedrus, in his daily prayers, the one thing he greatly desired from God was wisdom. For that divine man knew that for the unwise those things which commonly seem to be good are bad, whereas for the wise man the things which are said to be bad prove in the end to be good. Happy is the man for whom all things end well, but they do so only for him who uses them well. He alone uses each thing well who has learned of his own power and that of others, from wisdom. Therefore, only the priests of wisdom are happy, for even in this condition of human wretchedness, if I may call it so, they are in bliss, but the rest are unfortunate, so much so that even in human happiness they are wretched. From this, the great worth and divinity of the lawful philosophy become apparent, for on this the perfect priesthood of wisdom most surely takes its stand. Yet it is treated so unworthily and with so little respect by the great mass of people alone are really wise, and through whom the rest have means to be wise about anything, are considered more foolish than anyone else. Furthermore, these men are thought to conceive God ill by those who have learnt from philosophers how to worship God. For it is from the reasonings of the philosophers that they understand that the God whom they worship exists. How very false is the judgment of the crowd. Once the crowd thought the philosopher Democritus to be a fool, when, having become truly wise, he began to mock the folly of mortals, and was judged by the most wise physician, Hippocrates, to be the most discerning of all men. Then they condemned the divine Socrates for holding an apparently corrupt view of the gods. Yet, because his view of God was more direct than that of others, he was called by that very God of theirs the wisest man of all. But let the foolish crowd laugh as much as it likes. Let it mock philosophers as being foolish and wicked. Meanwhile, may philosophers mourn with Heraclitus the crowd's pathetic laughter, and with Democritus laugh at its ridiculous tears. 36. The man who is displeased by health-giving things is not healthy. Marsilio Ficino to Jacopo, the son of the orator Poggio, and heir to his father's art. Greetings. Recently, when reading a philosophic letter from Plutarch the Platonist to the Emperor Trajan, Broccolini suddenly came to mind, for I know that whatever is best gives him great pleasure. Now Plutarch gives me the greatest pleasure, because he praises nothing that is not good, and there is nothing good which he does not praise to the full. According to physicians, there is no surer sign of healthy taste than for that which is health given to seem delectable, and, conversely, for that which is harmful to be distasteful. But now hear the philosophic letter to an emperor, which in the fact, the preface, addressed to the Emperor Trajan, to Plutarch's book on the government of state and empire. This is a book which Polycrates translated almost word for word. I have recognized your modesty in not grasping for the highest office, which nonetheless you have always striven to merit by fine conduct. The further you are seen to be from the charge of your ambition, the more worthy you are deemed. So I rejoice in your virtue, and also in my fortune, provided you govern rightly what you have well earned. Otherwise, I have no doubt that you will be thrown into danger, and I will be the subject of abusive tongues. For Rome does not condone weakness in her emperors, and public opinion usually flings the transgressions of disciples back at their teachers. Thus, Seneca is rivaled by the tongues of his detractors for the crimes of his pupil Nero. The temerity of his young men is laid at Quintilian's door, and Socrates is blamed for having been too indulgent with his ward. But whatever you undertake will be right if you do not depart from yourself. If you first compose yourself and then dispose all things with virtue as your aim, all things, as one whole, will go well for you. I have represented to you the essence of political order and practice. If you are conforming to this, you have Plutarch as your authority on how to live. Otherwise, I call upon the letter before us to witness that you are not pursuing the ruin of government on Plutarch's authority. Farewell. 38. The preface of Marsilio Ficino to his short work on the life of Plato, addressed to Francesco Bandini. There was recently born to me, O magnanimous Bandini, on the birthday of the omnipotent Christ, a certain Plato. Although far from equal to that Plato who was the forefather and our father, he nevertheless seems to be in a strange way to be of a similar nature. Turning to him, I said, O Plato, will you seek again your ancestral and native seat of Athens? But he immediately exclaimed, O unjust fate! Alas! Nowhere do I have an ancestral home, O Iron Age, in which brutal Mars has laid in ruins the Attic citadels of Pallas. Therefore, Marsilio, not into unhappy Greece, but into Hungary shall I go for refuge. For there flourishes the great King Matthias, who, sustained at once by a Marsilio, not into unhappy Greece, but into Hungary shall I go for refuge. For there flourishes the great King Matthias, who, sustained at once by a wonderful power and wisdom in these years of manifest decline, will provide once more a sanctuary to the wise and powerful Pallas, that is, the philosophic schools of the Greeks. Further, my Bandini lives happily there at the court of the most fortunate king of Hungary. It was Bandini who once celebrated the birth of the divine Plato at his own expense, with the regal splendor within the city of Florence, and was also amongst the first present when the same convivium was reinstated outside the city of the illustrious Medici. Therefore I shall now go swiftly and eagerly to these friends in Hungary. Then I said to this Plato, it is an honor, it is our honor. Profit by this more favorable destiny. 39. Mountains do not separate spirits which are loftier than mountains. Marsilio Ficino of Florence. to the Reverend Father in Christ, Nicholas Bathory, the Lord Bishop of Vask in Hungary. Greetings. When I received your letters and those of Bandini, in which you strongly urged me to set out for Hungary, which would greatly please Matthias, His Most Serene Highness, the King of Hungary, I had already finished the 5 keys to Platonic wisdom. One of these, shorter than the others, is coming to you. But for me to come is difficult, and then to live under that sky perhaps is more difficult. In truth, to speak more accurately, if I were to come to you, I must need leave you first, before I am able to return. But it is not possible for me to leave those with whom long ago my soul was made one through the call of the Muse. Continue, I pray, to love your Marsilio, who, on account of your outstanding virtues, ardently loves you. Likewise, love our Francesco Bandini, a man outstanding in genius and magnanimity. Commend us both, if it is fitting, to the most fortunate King Matthias. In a short time something will be coming to him from our workshop, which will commend us, as best it may. Farewell, and yet live with me, happy spirits, in spite of the mountains which seem to separate us. Live with me, happy spirits, more lofty far, even more. Live with me, happy spirits, more loftily than even the most lofty mountains. I am to you that which one is to himself. You are to me which my 2 eyes are to me. 25th of May, 1479. This is the final letter in the volume number 3 of the letters of Marsilio Ficino. This was read by Joe Kiernan.